Good afternoon. This is February the 4th hearing, the very first hearing for the Education, Workforce, and Youth Committee. I am Councilman Robert Stokes Sr., Chairman of this committee. I would like to introduce the committee members on this committee. Councilman Bullock from the 9th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Glover from the 13th District.
Hello, Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman Middleton from the 6th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman Porter from the 10th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Councilman Torrance from the 7th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We also have Councilman Burnett from the 8th District.
Here.
And the host of this committee is Marguerite Kern. Before I start, I'm asking all speakers, panelists, to
Mr. Chair,
mute
I'm
yourself.
also a member of this committee. This is Councilman.
Oh, okay, I didn't hear you, Councilman, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Councilman Z. Cohen from the 1st District. I didn't see you, sir. Apologize. Before we start, I'm asking all speakers and panelists to mute yourself when you're not speaking. Identify yourself before you speak. Speak slowly and clearly. And after you have finished speaking, please mute yourself again until you are asked to speak again. We are here to discuss Council Resolution 21-0012R, Investigative Hearing, Safe Return to In-Person Schooling, for the purpose of inviting the CEO of the Baltimore City School System to provide the City Council with an update regarding safety precautions the school system is taking for the return of students and to in-person schooling, and inviting representatives from the Baltimore City Fire Department, Health Department, Department of Housing and Community Development to comment on the adequacy of these safety precautions. I'm just going to do an open statement. I called this hearing so we can all get a better understanding of the school reopening plans. We're still in the midst of a global pandemic, and everyone's lives have been turned upside down. Many parents and educators have serious concerns about what precautions will be taken to protect students, educators, essential staff, and everyone. We're here this evening to get clarity from the school system, the health department, and others charged with creating a supportive learning environment for students while keeping us safe. First, I'd like to recognize, Ellen DePietro is, I don't see her, she's here. Okay.
I'm here, Mr. Chair. Elena DePietro.
Thank you from the Law Department. Also, our Baltimore City CEO, Dr. Sandalisa.
Right here, Council.
Thank you. Thank you. Also, Roman Clark from the Fire Department. Mr. Clark, are you here? Okay. Dr. DeRaza, Health Commissioner here in Baltimore City.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. Stephanie Murdoch from the Department of Housing and Community Development. Okay. Leah Ferguson and Molly Raff from the Mayor's Office on Children and Family Success.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Also in attendance are a host of representatives from the Council President's Office, Mayor's Office, city agencies, and other organizations. Now, we're going to start this off by having the following speakers, and I'm going to just mention it in order. DeMonte Brown, the President of Baltimore Teachers Union. Joseph Kane, the Parent Community Advisory Board. Dr. Sandalisa, CEO of the school system. Dr. DeRaza, Commissioner of the Health Department. And Kevin Quinn from MDOT. So we will start off with opening statements from the president of BTU, DeMonte Brown. Hopefully, Ms. Brown, we can keep it within 5 minutes. Thank you. Ms. Brown, are you here?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to thank Councilman Stokes and the other council members for hosting this hearing and inviting me to speak. My name is Diane J Brown. I am the president of the Baltimore Teachers Union, and I am representing the thousands of teachers, PSRPs, clinicians, and related service providers in city schools. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to relay their concerns. And thank you to the council members who have spoken out in support of school safety during this time. It is good that City Schools has decided to delay the expansion of in-person learning for 2 weeks. I thank them for providing more time for clarity and detail. This 2-week delay is an opportunity to secure the resources necessary for a safe expansion and to put procedures in place for an entirely new way of schooling. This 2-week delay allows time for about 1,000 more staff members to receive their first dose of the vaccine through the City Schools Hopkins Vaccine Collaboration before schools for staff on February 22nd begin. The teachers and PSRPs who are directed to report in buildings in 18 days need more time so that they can receive both doses of the vaccine and have the 14-day waiting period necessary for the vaccine to reach full efficacy, not just have the first shot. In this time where there is a scarcity of vaccines, we are asking city schools to focus on only getting staff who have volunteered back in the classroom and getting them fully vaccinated. Teachers and PSRPs are understandably wary of returning to schools where the ventilation systems are old and battered. We are still lacking a plan for ongoing routine monitoring of air exchange rates in every space, where both the procedure and the data are transparent and accessible to the school community through a new City Schools ventilation dashboard. There are people currently working in buildings where upgrades are unfinished, and in buildings where upgrades are not complete, and in buildings where upgrades are complete. But in either case, we don't know that the MERV 13 filters and air purifiers are working properly because there's no regular ongoing air exchange monitoring taking place. Before potentially thousands more people are directed to report to buildings, we should be monitoring the air exchange rate in the spaces that already have been in use for months. If there are problems with the ventilation system, even after an upgrade, how soon will it be fixed? Spaces without adequate air exchange rates should not be used at all, and there needs to be a clear plan for what happens when a space cannot be occupied. City Schools has communicated to us that they are exploring regular asymptomatic testing for students and staff. As COVID testing involves a medical diagnostic process, the entire asymptomatic testing process must be conducted by a full-time school nurse in every school, who has the necessary tests and additional PPE for also testing students who are suspected to be symptomatic. The tests need to provide same-day results, and staff and students should provide an initial negative COVID test before reporting in person or take a test provided by City Schools upon reporting. Staff and students already in buildings should be tested now. Any testing protocol that requires students and staff to be transported off-site by City Schools or one that relies on untrained school personnel to administer COVID tests is risky rather than reliable. As the district continues to explore asymptomatic testing, the members of the BTU are demanding that the testing program be completely developed, communicated, and in effect before expanding in-person learning. And lastly, given frequent shortages and unexpected developments like new variants of coronavirus, it's hard to predict when the necessary vaccines, ventilation, and testing will be completely in place. That's why, instead of setting arbitrary dates for expanding in-person learning, City Schools should instead create minimum standards for public health metrics that must be met for at least a week before expanding in-person programming. When Baltimore City hits key milestones in the case rate per 100,000 and a testing positivity rate, and then and only should we be returning to schools. You want me to
30
start?
seconds.
Okay,
No, you got 30 seconds.
we are currently
Sorry.
still in the highest risk category for risk of introduction and transmission of COVID-19 in schools established by the CDC. We have seen encouraging news over the past days, and we are experiencing a downward trend for the first time in a long time. We had the chance to get ahead on the spread of the pandemic. And if we prematurely expand in-person programming without the necessary full vaccinations, adequate ventilation, and a proactive testing plan, we, like a lot of cities, will reverse our gains and extend the pandemic's grip on us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Joseph Kane, the Parent Community Advisory Board. And if we can keep this to 5 minutes, Mr. Kane, is fine. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for inviting PCAB to be part of this hearing. Thank you, other city council members as well. Good evening. My name is Joseph Kane. I am the chair of the Parent Community Advisory Board. I'm also a graduate of Baltimore City Schools. I have 4 children in Baltimore City Schools, and my wife also attended Western, she told me to say. PCAB has listened to the concerns and questions of students, families, and community members regarding reopening. PCAB wishes to convey some common themes from our discussions and meetings. These concerns aren't new and have been shared publicly and privately with city schools leadership. We also make this statement available after the meeting. Families are deeply concerned about keeping their children safe, not only in the classroom, but while commuting on the MTA, as many 9th and 12th graders do, for some over an hour one way. PCAB has not seen any discussion on contact tracing for students and families who depend on public transportation, a critical task in a district that largely goes without yellow bus service and has a high out-of-zone enrollment, even K through 5. These concerns are heightened for families in which a child or adult has a chronic health condition and those with special needs, particularly for children that need assistance with toileting, feeding, and other tasks that demand close proximity throughout the day. Families have expressed profound concern about beloved teachers, PSRPs, custodians, school nurses, therapists, and other staff given the slow rollout of vaccination statewide and recent local rescheduling difficulties that have delayed vaccination of teachers who are still being asked to return prior to receiving both doses of the vaccine. We also want to highlight infrastructure. Families and students are too familiar with poor conditions of many Baltimore City school buildings. We have listened to year-long promises to have clean water, also functioning heat and air conditioning, clean bathrooms that are in good working order, to only see our hopes dashed. City schools ask parents and teachers to trust that they're and have faith in their air filtration plan during this critical time. But we know that past maintenance has gone unaddressed because of lack of funds or personnel. We're concerned about the ability to initiate and maintain critical air exchange and filtration, particularly in spaces like basement or interior windowless classrooms in schools that have windows that did not open. We're also concerned about the health metrics. Currently, we know that according to the BBRM, fiscal year 20, city schools had only 10 registered nurses for 80,000 students. The rest were community health nurses, 48. Then we had licensed practical nurses, 5, and then 137 school health aides. Given pre-existing health burdens, such as high childhood asthma rates, is City Schools truly ready for this unprecedented health challenge, given its recent staffing profile and this idea of one van that's going to go around to every school for testing? I want to skip over and make sure we hit the high points here. I do want to acknowledge, though, that there are parents who, for whom distant learning is not working for a variety of reasons. Internet connectivity, child and sibling care demands, social isolation, a number of reasons. For some families, online learning has weakened their relationship to their school community and has created uncertainty about their child's immediate and long-term academic success. After weighing risk in in-person school in distance environment with safety precautions, some families are choosing to go in person. What we're asking is that we do it in a safe way. And I want to wrap up here. Academic success. BCPSS mentions grade failures and learning loss as the issues driving reopening. We don't deny the academic success of our students is important, but let's be honest, while grades have decreased this academic year, providing a quality and equitable education throughout the district has always been a challenge for city schools. That's just the fact that we That's just the facts, and it's supported by data shared with PCAP comparing Q1 of this year to Q1 of last year. Our questions are, if we bring children, teachers, administrators, and support staff into the schools, will we applaud how far they have come in the successes of our students, or will we mourn the loss of the hasty decision to bring them into buildings that aren't ready without the vaccinations they need, and without community buy-in? What is driving reentry? Is the district making decisions based on health data, academic data? If it's the latter, how does the district intend to ensure that in-person slots are filled by students who are failing or in danger of failing? And I'll say this to wrap it up here. You know, we've listened and we've really toiled on how to present PCAP's position, but for all these reasons and more, PCAP opposes a plan to expand reopening to the schools, even on a delayed basis for this school year. We do not want more town halls or pre-choose sessions where parents and community members are given limited opportunities to ask questions and where district does all the talking. We want a collaborative experience where parents, teachers, all stakeholders are coming together to make decisions around reopening. If equity is our policy here in city schools, we want to make sure that we look to that policy of equity and make sure that all students have and teachers have a safe experience in our school district. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, thank you. I also want to recognize Councilwoman Odette Ramos from the 14th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone.
Councilman Costello from the 11th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Schleifer from the 5th District. Councilman Schleifer? Okay, we'll go back. And Councilman Mark Conway from the 4th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
One moment. Well, we're going to start off. Dr. Sandalisa was going to be doing a 10-minute presentation. Dr. Sandalisa, before you do it, can you just introduce some of your staff that you have with you?
Thank you, Chair Stokes. What I will do is, I'm trying to see who is here right now. We have with us Melissa Broom, who is our legislative director, Allison Perkins Cohen, who is our chief of staff. I believe is Jonathan, I don't see Jonathan Collins yet, but I believe he is here as well. Those are the folks that I see right now in the panelists tab, sir. If you see others you'd like me to introduce, I'm more than happy to do that as we get into questions.
Mr. Dewana Durrett, I believe is, yes.
Okay, I couldn't see her in.
That's all right, she's here, that's all right.
Thank you, and Dewana Durrett, who is with the legislative team with the with our board of commissioners. And I believe board president Chinya is also here somewhere because she did text me, just hard to see from my view.
You may begin.
Great. Thank you very much. We're going to queue up. And I think as a way, as Melissa gets things started and we move to the first slide, one of the things I think that is important to keep in mind, that we have been operating under the understanding that for large numbers of our young people here in city schools, large numbers of our families, in-person learning is what meets their actual social, emotional, and behavioral health needs. It is the relationship building, and we knew that there was high likelihood that there would be disproportionate impact to students of color, students coming from low-income communities, and students with disabilities. As we move into the next slide, what we'll begin to see, what the City Council will begin to see, is that we are looking first at the disparate impact that we can see already from distance learning. Again, I just want to stress that we know for some families, district learning virtual learning has been working, but we see here in terms of the increased failure rates of students in terms of course failures, a significant increase in those failures at every grade level band, but particularly if you look at the 6 through 12 band, from quarter one in 1920 to where we are now in quarter one of 2021. Next slide. You'll also see one of the things that we highlight, which drove a lot of our focus on bringing ninth graders back and providing a ninth grade option for families, was that we know from education research that the likelihood of a young person who has what we call one core course failure or a course flag or a GPA less than 2.0 is less likely to graduate from high school and less likely to enter a college or career-ready post-secondary path. You'll see 61% of our current ninth graders actually fall into that category. Next slide. You'll also see as another indicator, GPAs at the high school level across the board have increased such that you'll see we have significant increases of students with GPAs less than 1.0 within high school. We don't have the slide here, and I don't think it's necessary, but I would also say we have seen some of the literacy progress we've been making in the early grades, particularly at kindergarten, has also been erased if we do a year-to-year comparison. Next slide. I think the other piece that's important for City Council and the public to know is that we've also been monitoring the social and emotional impact of a completely virtual environment for a number of our young people here in Baltimore City. And I think what we are seeing is that there are greater instances where families are communicating that their young people, the increased isolation, we know that a lot of the traumas that are normally experienced have increased. We also know that the primacy of relationships between students and teachers has been challenging at all levels. And we do know, for example, that our self-harm and suicide indicator here in Baltimore City has increased significantly during this period. Next slide. So when we think about the rollout of in-person learning opportunities, the reality is that Baltimore City has been opening schools safely, slowly since this past summer. We started out with summer school programming, moved into student learning centers, and then actually expanded for early grades as well as our English language learners and students with disabilities at 27 schools in November, and then rolled out additional opportunities, the target to roll out additional opportunities on March 1st. I think one of the themes here that we have seen that I think is a recurring theme is one that parents and families want to see what the conditions in schools are based on some of the historical factors that were cited earlier. And what we have seen is that as we provide more in-person learning opportunities, we are seeing over time that more families opt in. And that happened in the summer. It happened with our student learning centers prior to, I think, some of the disruptions with the holidays and things in November, as well as some of the downtime we took in response to some of the advice and counsel that we received from our health department and our health advisory board. We have seen that increasing numbers of families want in-person learning opportunities. Next slide. I'll roll through these quickly. Chair, so that we can make sure that we get through. I think the highlight on this slide is that you'll see the new dates that we announced yesterday in response to what we were hearing from teachers on the ground who have been teaching in terms of the preparation and making sure that all teachers, when they return, actually have what they need and the time to plan for a return to in-person, as well as what we heard from families with regards to wanting more information about things like, what will the school day look like? What will my child's schedule look like? And of course, giving all schools the opportunity to host in-person open houses for interested families while giving staff time to get acclimated and actually see their own classrooms as well. Next slide. I think as we look at health factors, it's important to note that as of January, just over half of the nation's school children, and that includes many urban centers and school districts with large percentages of low income and children of color, are actually back in school. That Baltimore is not an outlier. And what we have found as we have monitored this reopening is that these 5 key mitigation strategies, as identified by the CDC, when followed, result in very low transmission rates in schools. We in city schools have seen this even as we have increased from summer through present day. What we have seen is that these 5 key mitigation strategies in place following CDC guidelines and the guidelines in school districts that are seeing very low in-school transmission means that we are able to continue to provide safe in-person learning opportunities because these key 5 mitigation strategies have been in place from the beginning. Next slide. With regard to testing and vaccines, I know that the City Council has also been following. We are very proud and thankful for our relationship with Johns Hopkins University and University of Maryland Medical Center to provide vaccines, COVID vaccines for our staff. We have worked very closely with the health department, Dr. Zaraza and her staff, also on this. You'll see here that since September 28th, we have had just 1 transmission event at our in-person location at a meal site. We will also note that the CDC that has been following this again for at least since September, the head of the CDC yesterday came out with basically the notice that we can safely open school without every single teacher needing to be vaccinated before opening. This mirrors what the CDC finding, mirrors what we have found here on the ground in Baltimore City, but we will continue to support our teachers, our educators' access to vaccinations. We prioritized our groups of paraprofessionals, custodians, food and nutrition workers, principals, and teachers who are currently and have been working in person safely, but we prioritize them, and we will continue to prioritize teachers for those opportunities as other school staff according to when they are planned to return back in school. And I'm looking at the clock, sir, so I will speed it up. Next slide. With regard to sick leave benefits, we know there's been some discussion about that. City schools actually made the decision that even after the federal legislation that covered Families First Coronavirus Response Act, while the provisions of that act actually expired at the end of December, and many school districts across the state and country ended those benefits, city schools extended those leave provisions through January 31st of 2021, particularly in light of the fact that school districts and other nonprofits are not eligible for reimbursement from the federal government. Starting in February, you'll see here a list of the granted leave times outside of regular accrued leave within city schools have been made to make sure that staff who are instructed to quarantine for a reason other than their own illness will be able to do so with granted leave, as well as if they develop COVID-like symptoms when there has been a COVID case at their work site. Next slide. And I'm going to turn this over very briefly to Jonathan Collins, who will take us very quickly through where we are with regards to air purification, safety, as well as ventilation. Jonathan, are you here? Okay. Jonathan is probably coming in. I can walk through this very quickly, and then if Jonathan wants to, oh, are you there, Jonathan?
Yes, unfortunately my mouse started acting up on me and
Don't worry about
unmute.
it. Don't worry about it, Jonathan. You're on. Go ahead.
Yes, my apologies. As far as air purification and ventilation, in our mechanical services department, we have performed sample air monitoring tests of different buildings. We have evaluated equipment for their operations. And based on CDC and ASHRAE guidelines, as well as our relationships and collaborations with our industry experts, we've tailored plans for each of the buildings, going into MERV 13 air filters, looking at the ventilation systems that were in these buildings, and where the ventilation was not possible with what we had on hand, based on CDC guidelines and ASHRAE standards. We have air purifiers that will be in each of the classrooms. So this is how we are facing the challenges of each individual building and the different variables that are in these spaces. We have approximately 8,300 air purifiers in our inventory that are at this time being rolled out and installed in each of the classrooms, office spaces that's in the schools where our students will be. As we're tracking these, there will be a live dashboard that, as we've just said earlier, will be coming online very soon. It will track each of the classrooms, the statuses of the systems, as well as the air purifiers that are on hand in those spaces as well.
Mr. Collins, I know you probably have some more slides on this, but
I believe I have one more slide.
okay, well, go ahead, because I know the questions.
I'll keep it very short.
Next slide.
The next slide, please. All right. This is just what we briefly just spoke of. This is the dashboard that will be available, as I said, first week of February. It will have the building assessment information, the classrooms, how many air purifiers are in each space, and what the permanent plan is to provide the indoor air quality for each of those spaces. I'll wrap it up with that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Sandalisa.
Sure.
Our next, I'm sorry, you're not finished, Dr. Sandalisa?
No, it's fine because I know we're at time. What I've just put up, Chair, so that you can see is what our community engagement plans are within the next month or so. And, just for comment, but if there are questions later, I can take those. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Dr. DeRosa from the Baltimore City Health Department, our health commissioner, who will be presenting also for 10 minutes. Thank you. Dr. DeRosa.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to share some of the ways the Baltimore City Health Department has been working with and supporting city schools for the past few months. So I actually attend a weekly data review along with members of my team, including our chief epidemiologist, with City Schools leadership. We also participate in City Schools Advisory Board. We've had ongoing participation for multiple months. And I've, again, provided guidance directly on a school board call, as well as to the team, as well as my chief medical officer. Dr. McDowell has also spoken to a town hall for educators around COVID-19 vaccinations. We work with city schools to help establish the partnership with the University of Maryland to facilitate testing at their sites. We also work to establish that partnership with Hopkins to support vaccination of educators. And we provided vaccines directly to Hopkins for support of city school educators. We have a designated team in-house that would support contact investigation in the event of positive cases within schools. And again, we've been in close contact with Dr. Santelises and her team for the past few months to offer support and information around data and how things are progressing across the city in terms of our overall case counts. And that's all I have, Chair.
Dr. DeRozzi, can you just introduce your staff too also real quick for us? Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, I have my legislative director, DePaul Nibber. I also have our assistant commissioner in the Bureau of School Health, Ms. Francine Childs. I have the deputy commissioner of Community Health and Youth Wellness, Mary Beth Haller. My chief medical officer, I think, is straddling this hearing and another meeting, Dr. McDowell. And then I also have our director of acute communicable diseases, the Office of Acute Communicable Diseases, Mary Grace White.
Thank you so much. Our next presenter is Mr. Kevin Quinn, MTA Administrator. Mr. Quinn?
Okay.
Presentation, thank you.
Yeah, good evening, Chair. Yeah, am I able to share my screen?
Yes, one moment.
Okay. Well, you get that set up. My name's Kevin Quinn. I'm the Administrator of MTA, and I'm joined today by Sean Adgerson, our Chief Operating Officer, as well as Tom Hewitt, our Director of Service Development. We'll see if...
Mr. Quinn, you can proceed.
I can, yes, I see. I am the presenter. Okay, let's see what we can do here. There's always a miracle. Okay, great. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so I just have a few slides. I'm just going to run through very quickly. So first, from our perspective, I want everyone to know that we are absolutely committed to the safety and protection of our employees, our riders, and Baltimore City students. And so I want to use this as an opportunity to talk about some of our cleaning precautions and cleaning things that we're doing on our buses, our trains, and our facilities. And I'm going to talk about our scheduling a bus service for a bit. I want folks to know that we have implemented several procedural changes and vehicle modifications to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. So one of those things is what's called EcoSeal. This is an antimicrobial treatment that we've applied on all of our interior surfaces of our buses. This makes it very easy to clean and wipe down every day. It's antimicrobial, so it resists that. So another piece for us are seat retrofits. Many of you may know that for many years we've had cloth seats. We're in the process of retrofitting those seats to plastic seats, which are much easier to clean. We have that underway right now, and that makes sanitizing those much easier. We've also put in place some operator barriers. We have already operator barriers next to our operators, and we've added some extensions, kind of a curtain extension to that. Since April of 2020, we do have a mask requirement that is on our buses. This was actually just reinforced by a CDC federal mask mandate that just came out a couple days ago. I will note that we do weekly surveys. We do kind of a random sampling of surveys of mask compliance on our bus and our rail vehicles. I can tell you that it's regularly in the 95% range in terms of mask compliance. We do have police that get involved and try to encourage folks to wear masks if they don't want to do that. I want to convey that our buses and our trains, those are disinfected daily. They're fogged monthly. And so we put a lot into our cleaning. Some additional actions that we've taken to date, disinfecting rail vehicles and facilities. I've talked about just as much as we're doing on our vehicles, we're also doing in our bus divisions and our rail divisions. We're regularly power washing our stations, distributing PPE to our frontline employees. I'll also just note that any person coming onto an MTA facility for several months now, nearly a year, has to do a COVID-19 screening. So they're asked several questions about have they been around somebody positive? Are they exhibiting any symptoms? And so every one of our employees goes through that every single day. We have some buses at our division, so our operators have the ability to space out. Our mechanics have dividers between workstations. a lot of communications around that face covering requirement. And we're also, we've been strong advocates for early vaccinations for our operators, our frontline transit workers. They are in the group phase 1C, and so that did begin a week or so ago. We are working with the Maryland Department of Health to get our frontline workers those vaccinations. I think everyone is feeling these shortages around the state, but we're continuing to advocate for that. On the service side, we are absolutely committed to working with BCPSS to ensure that schools have adequate transit access. Following one of these hearings, actually, we established a joint kind of task force back in September. So I want folks to know that our organizations are coordinating regularly. Our current fixed route bus service provides a quarter-mile access to over 260 schools in the region, 170 of those in Baltimore City. And we get a lot of questions about buses and how full they are. And so since COVID began, we've really tracked bus trips by seating capacity. And I can tell you that about 98% of our bus trips are less than 75% full. And I wanted to provide kind of the full data here, whether it's system-wide or just on our CityLink or local-link routes. But you can see that system-wide, 87% of our buses are less than 50% capacity. That means they're less than 50% full. So the vast majority of our buses are less than half full. Overall, system-wide, we are about 50% down from where we were a year or so ago. So that's where we are from a full kind of capacity standpoint. From a schedule standpoint, our current schedules do incorporate the FY19 to 20 school information that we have. In November of 2020, we just last year, we began operating 26 supplemental trippers serving 4 schools. So we have begun our school tripper service to 4 high schools: Carver, City Neighbors, Digital, and Reginald Lewis high schools. And as schools fully open, we are absolutely prepared to offer 66 morning trips, 107 afternoon trips. That's our normal school service. Those are the normal school trippers that we put out every single year. And we are coordinating with BCPSS to maintain similar bell times. And what I really want to convey with that is that our schedules are built on the previous bell times, and so we are encouraging Baltimore City Public School System to maintain similar bell times. Our schedules are difficult to change. We are they're created and essentially bound with our collective bargaining agreement with our union, local ATU Local 1300, and so making adjustments to those schedules can be very difficult. And so I'd encourage everyone to keep as similar bell times as possible. That's really the main thing I have. I appreciate the opportunity to come before this group, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Can you just introduce your staff, and can you send us a copy of your presentation also?
Absolutely. I will get that over to you. My staff joining me tonight are Sean Adgerson, our Chief Operating Officer, and Tom Hewitt, our Director of Service Development.
And real quick, I want to recognize Max Stegman from Council President Mosby's office, Nikki Thompson from Council President Mosby's office, and Nina Themlis from Mayor Scott's office. Before we start our public testimony, Melissa Broom, I believe you had something that you wanted to share with the council.
3 statements.
3 statements you wanted to read from some of your parents or teachers?
I'm happy to do that now or to mix it in during public comment.
No, we can do that. Hello, somebody said something? Okay, can you just do the statements now so we can go into our public testimony?
Yes, I'm pulling them up right now. Councilman Stokes, can I begin with the brief movie, the 1-minute movie testimony that was shared, and then read the statements?
Okay, you have 3 statements in a movie, right?
Yes, 3 written statements and a brief video.
Okay, can we? Okay, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. My name is Kaisa Jackson. I am the parent of Cash Braxton, who's a third grader at Dorothy Height Elementary, and Kelson Braxton, who's a second grader at Dorothy Height Elementary. The reason that I chose to send my children back to school was not only does my youngest son has autism, but I thought that it would be a great way for them to feel a sense of normalcy and also work on their social skills and build new friendships and relationships through this whole pandemic. I felt as though they would benefit from it because I'm not a school teacher. I don't have like the patience that school teachers have. So I figured that if he was in a smaller classroom, he would also benefit from not only it being a smaller class, but more one-on-one attention from the proctor and the child. Cash and Kelson are doing phenomenal this school year. We couldn't ask for a better program, and I'm so excited that my husband and I chose to send the boys back to school. They absolutely love it. I was a little weary because we couldn't walk them into school like we normally would do on the first day of school, but they assured us that our babies were safe, and they send videos and pictures all day of the students and what they're doing. They didn't have any requirements for us to bring anything or to send anything back to the school because of safety issues. And I just really am glad that we chose to send the boys back to the SLC. Thank you.
Oh no. Councilman Stokes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'm trying to stop sharing my screen, and it's not working. Maybe you could stop having me present. If Marguerite could make me not a presenter, I can begin reading the statement since you can hear me.
You can go ahead and read, yes.
Okay, thank you. So the first statement is from a parent named KB Smith. I'll read the letter. Dear council members, I am a grandparent and primary caregiver of 3 Baltimore City public students at Carver High School, Liberty Elementary, and ACE. First, I would like to thank the teachers and staff at Carver for being understanding and keeping me on point, and also the team at ACE for wrapping around my granddaughter and helping her to stay well and focused during what has been a tough time for her and everyone in our family. My husband and I are the sole providers and caregivers for my grandbabies in grades 12th, 6th, and 5th grades, and virtual learning has not been easy for any of us. We tried it, and it's not working. It has been so hard to engage them and keep them motivated. Getting them up in the morning when we have to work and be out of the home and keeping the same routine has been a challenge. We work in the food service and medical fields and are essential workers. So the routine that we once had when school was open is just not there. Emotionally, our children are not okay. For our senior, who is in the P-Tech program and loved the hands-on work with computers with his friends and teachers, it has been the hardest. Right now, we are just praying that he is able to graduate and make it through. We can't see the road ahead for him because it is just too much. I want everyone to be safe and healthy. I want our teachers to be supported too. I have family that have been impacted by COVID. So I know why some are against going back, and I understand that. But I think families should have a choice, especially for children that are not doing well at home. I think that if the conditions in schools are safe and we follow the guidelines and educate everyone on how to stay safe, all families should be able to choose to go to school in person, especially if virtual learning is not working. All of my grandchildren have experienced trauma, and our family has been impacted by substance abuse, loss, and grief for most of our lives. Getting a good education and doing well in school, going to college, and having a career is the one thing that we know could help change some of what they have been through. It is the hope that we have for them, but right now, their mental health and learning have been negatively impacted. We are asking the people who make the decisions to consider the needs of the families that need the schools to reopen. We are not looking for babysitters. We are just hoping that you work hard to find a way to serve the students that need to be in school. We need a solution that meets their needs and keeps them learning. Thank you. The next statement is from Malibu Mangina. Greetings, my name is Malibu Mangina. I am a parent of students in grades pre-K, 2nd, 5th, 7th, 10th.
Melissa? We'll come back to Melissa. Before we start the public testimony, there's a 2-minute limit for each speaker. I will let each speaker know when the 30 seconds remain. For those who signed in using a computer, please use the raise hand function to indicate you wish to testify, and we will start with you. Next, we will go through all the users who have called in to the hearing. Attendees who called in cannot be identified by name and will be unmuted by the committee staff one by one. You will hear 2 beeps when you are unmuted. If you wish to testify, please state your name at the beginning of your testimony. If a caller does not want to provide testimony, then simply you need to say they do not want to provide testimony after the 2 beeps. If any speaker is inaudible, they will be directed to call back. After public testimony is finished, the committee members, each council member will be given the opportunity to ask 2 questions.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, you can go right ahead. Thank you.
Hi, can I make a joint statement with Marigold Louis?
Okay, well, the 2 minutes, but let me also make clear that you cannot ask the panelists any questions. Only questions will be asked by the council person. Sure, you can proceed.
Okay. Is she here?
We're gonna, we only can listen to one person at a time. So if you're the first person, it only can be one person because we have people in this raise hands function that's waiting to just speak.
Okay.
Let me make it clear, the raise hand function means only that one person can speak. Because there's a lot of people on this line and we want to get them an opportunity to speak also. Thank you.
Okay. I can start then. Good afternoon. I'm Kimberly Vasquez. I am a senior at Baltimore City College High School. I am also lead organizer of SOMOS, which stands for Students Organizing a Multicultural and Open Society. I'm here to talk about the demands that the student strike has brought up, I believe last week. I first wanted to start off with the poem that Anaya Taylor wrote called War on Students. It goes as follows. How can school be a safe haven if it is also a war zone? Principal be general, classmates be soldiers, education be America, and we be dying men. Sacrificing peace for pens, safe space for essays. How can I add integers when I'm risking subtracting my grandmother from the family equation every time that I walk into the building? And they don't care. They just want to multiply dollar signs while dividing our lives. We be dying soldiers, mistaking good grades for good days. How can we bear honor when we can't keep the armor that saves us from things that harm us? I want to transition right into the first demand that students have made, the first to equitable reopening plan with student voice. We want BCPS to commit to bringing students, parents, and educators to the table when making this reopening plan so we can do it together. And as well, moving forward, having the student board, student commissioner.
Ms. Kimmel, you have 30 seconds, so.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Secondly, for the safe and accessible public transportation, about 30,000 students catch public transportation and 60% of high schoolers take a transfer of buses. We want a specific and detailed transportation plan, and as well as a 24/7 charm cards now and even after the pandemic. And the last that I'll touch on is investment in digital equity. In Maryland, 23% of households have no broadband internet service, and 50.2% of these are African American households. The state of Maryland, local governments, and school districts should invest in sustainable at-home Wi-Fi and devices for families instead of investing in an unsafe plan.
Thank you, Ms. Kimberly. I appreciate it. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Chris Fallow. You're unmuted, sir. Chris, last name Bilal.
Thank you, everyone, for having me. My name is Chris Fallow. I want to give thanks to everyone from the city of Baltimore, Maryland, and across the country who attended the BTU's car caravan yesterday that began at City Hall and reached North Avenue yesterday. I just wanted to take a moment to read some of the most notable signs that I saw on the car from folks who participated in this caravan. One of the signs read, "Are mask breaks part of CDC guidance?" Another one says, "Objective, BCPSS will be able to prioritize health of the school communities by creating a data-driven safety plan and commit to not reopening buildings until safe." Another one says that Black students and community lives still matter. I'm looking at another sign that says, "I cannot teach from my grave." Hashtag still not safe. I see another sign that says, "I need a shot, no confidence in your plan." I'm seeing another sign that says, "Martyr was not in the job description." I'm seeing another sign from a car that says, "Still not safe." I'm seeing another sign that says, "BCPSS, how much will you gain from our losses?" I'm seeing another sign that says, 78% of the children who died of COVID were Black, Hispanic, or Native American. But please, tell us more about equity. I'm seeing another sign that says, "While we agree with the delay, our demands have not changed. Hashtag make it make sense. Hashtag only when it's safe for staff and students and for their families." I'm seeing another sign that says, "I don't trust Dr. Santelises." I'm seeing another sign from the car caravan of over 300 people last night that says, "Virtual learning saves real lives. Vaccines for all, ventilation for all, metrics for all, testing for all,
30
health
seconds.
over everything else. Hashtag still not safe." I'm looking at another sign that says, from a 300 strong caravan, "Governor, CEO, MSDE, meet from home to mandate school in person. Hashtag make it make sense. Hashtag still not safe." Seeing another sign that says still not safe. We're seeing another sign that says 700 teachers and support staff dead as of 2/1. So that's a lie around 0 cases of community transmission. I'm seeing another sign that says, all right, thank you, Mr. Stokes, for having me. Sign the petition, bit.ly/BTU PETIT.
Thank you.
Next up is Kamala, last name spelled Carnes.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, City Council members. My name is Kamala Carnes. I am the principal of Augusta Fell Savage Institute of Visual Arts. It is a 9 through 12 high school that's located in Southwest Baltimore. I want to thank you for allowing me to speak this evening about why it's important for us to be able to reopen schools for in-person learning. Many of my students do not live in ideal situations. I am worried about their safety, lack of academic progress, and the lack of consistency that all scholars need to be successful. I believe that we need to provide families options. If one option is to stay virtual, wonderful. But if they want to return, we need to be able to provide this option as well. I am concerned that we are going to lose an entire generation of scholars who we will never be able to re-engage. I want everyone to stay safe, and I believe COVID has impacted our communities. However, if my colleagues from independent and private schools can bring their scholars back in person safely, I strongly believe we can do the same thing. Many students have started working in positions that are offering our scholars an hourly wage that has a false sense of security that school is no longer necessary or important. However, we all know that they won't be able to advance to mid-level management positions because they won't have the necessary qualifications. I appreciate you all listening and committing to working with city schools to support us returning to in-person. Please stay safe and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Our next speaker is Kelly, last name spelled C-A-R-I-D-E-O.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Kelly Carrillo. I am first and foremost the very proud mother of 6 beautiful children that have come through city schools, and I'm also the very proud principal of Beachfield Elementary Middle School in Southwest Baltimore. In the fall, I was charged with opening a student learning center to over 50 families in our community. We worked tirelessly with the district to ensure that we were open safely and we had all the proper PPE. During our time opened at the Student Learning Center, we did not have one single positive COVID case in any of our scholars. The Student Learning Center was a very positive experience for our families, as many of our families were desperate to get back to work full time. Families were grateful because they shared that the relationships with their scholars was failing due to the constraints of not being able to support with virtual learning. And it gave some of our scholars that were immensely struggling with social emotional challenges and outlets to receive in-person learning. Also, families shared that their scholars were becoming depressed, creating unhealthy habits, and had to be left unsupervised because they had no other way to provide for their families but to leave them home. I then was charged with bringing back our kindergarten babies and students that receive specialized services. Today, I was able to go see them on their yoga mats, as I am able to do every day, talking and laughing with each other and talking about how they were planning on having a snowball fight when they got home. I can also share that I'm a parent before I'm a principal, as I shared, so I understand the concern, the fear, and also the unknown. My 6-year-old Gianna and my 12th grader Katie, they're rocking it with the hybrid. But my 10th grader, who is struggling immensely, he has not been given any of his services and he needs to be in school. My 11th grader that attends Poly, he is doing well academically, but socially and emotionally, this has been very hard on him. And lastly, my daughter Gabriella, who is a junior pre-med student in college, although she is physically in school, she is not going in person in classes, and that has been deafening to her too. So I get it, I trust it as a parent. But what I can attest to and what I will stand here and say as a principal, this can be done and it can be done safely. Beachfield is proof. I have been to work every single solitary day since Labor Day, and so is my entire admin team, my assistant principal, my school community specialist, my wholeness specialist, my guidance counselor, every single one of them coming there volunteering to rock it out for my scholars at the Beachfield community, because that's what my community said they needed. I get to see my scholars daily, talk to them from the door. I see my staff, we give air high fives, and we keep it moving. Is this normal? Absolutely not. But either is getting your nails done, going to the doctor, going to the grocery store, but we make it happen. In closing, what I can tell you is that I can confidently tell my families that they have an option. And if they so choose to send their babies to be with me, I will continue to hold all stakeholders, staff members, and scholars accountable to follow all CDC guidelines and to make learning safe, fun, and as optimal as possible during these very uncertain times. I want to thank you for allowing me this opportunity. Please stay safe.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Mary Gold, last name spelled L-E-W-I.
Hello, my name is Marigold Louis. I am with Somos and I'm a student at Baltimore City College. I would like to note that I would like not to be rushed as I am speaking because I am a student and I like to take my time when I'm talking. And I would also like to note that students were not put on this agenda. And when the first person, whoever went first, the CEO or whatever, she was not rushed. So I would like not to be rushed. And also, students were supposed to be a part of this because we are affected most. However, most of the people on here have totally disregarded students, and we do not appreciate that as students. Secondly, I would like to go into the whole nursing situation. BCPS has 44 full-time registered nurses, and yet we have 169 schools. Some nurses have to split their times between 4 different schools, and this is not sanitary. And according to Wendy Smith, the head of the Nurses Union, Baltimore City is the only jurisdiction that uses this model to deliver health care to students. In Maryland, every school district has at least 1 nurse to each school, and some systems have 2 for larger junior schools such as high schools. My demands are that there should be full-time nurses in all school buildings 5 days a week during all school hours, and nurses must be given the resources they need, because most of the time you go to the nurse's office and she's handing you a paper towel because they don't have enough resources. Another demand I have is a break for standardized testing. I have kindergartner sisters, and my kindergartner sister had to take iReady today, and I had to sit there and watch a kindergartner struggle to read full sentences. Not
30
kindergartners
seconds. 30
cannot
seconds.
read. Sorry, sir, you are rushing me, and I've said in the beginning that I do not want to.
Everybody have 2 minutes.
Yes, but whoever was the first person to speak, I timed her, and her stuff went over 10 minutes. It was 13 minutes.
Everybody have 2 minutes.
ECPSS must waive state and city standardized testing for the remainder of the 2021 school year. We have to commit to advocate for reduced state testing, commit to advocate against the MCAP being used to calculate our final grades in the future. I have a mother. My home runs on my mother. She has to work a full-time job to be able to care for all of us. And now sending kids back to school, y'all are wasting all this money to send us back to school in unsafe conditions. I don't get why it has to be political. Why don't y'all come down to earth like humans and realize that these are the lives of children? Imagine if me or my sisters bring something home back to my mother. My household is gonna fall. Like, what do y'all expect? Somebody please consider that students have to have a voice in this, and that there are people being put at stake. And it's not all about testing. Yeah, I get Maryland has to be up with the test scores or whatever, but I'm trying to say that these are lives here. Does that reach?
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Martin Thomas.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
I think students should go back to school because virtual school isn't really helping. I think children need hands-on learning because some children might not have stuff to do, like science projects. All children don't have the materials to do certain stuff. I also think children should go to school for more exercise. Some schools have gym and other helpful stuff to do exercise. I also think that children should interact with people and make new friends.
Are you finished, Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Melissa, last name spelled Schober.
Hello, good evening. My name is Melissa Schober, and I'm the spouse of a city schools teacher. In addition, I have serious and sustained concerns about the ability of city schools to deliver on some of the promises that they made this evening. For example, city schools has repeatedly told parents and community members that social and emotional needs are critical to the return of students. Yet we have not seen any plan to expand the availability of school health services to those students. This is particularly of concern due to city schools' own data. From school year 2016 through March of 2020, when schools closed for COVID, over 1,200 students were transported by city school police under emergency petition, meaning they were deemed a danger to themselves or others. The social and emotional needs of our students are not new. They have been a problem for some years, yet city schools chooses to spend more on school police than on the social and emotional needs and health of students. Where is the plan that contains assistance for these families and these students? We have not seen any details for providing ongoing services for the critical emotional health needs of our students who are returning to buildings not the same as they were in early 2020. These students come back to the building with stressors that none of them had earlier this year and last. We cannot rewind to where we were prior to the pandemic, and pretending to do so is untenable and irresponsible. Finally, I would add, when City Schools makes note of health metrics and the Health Advisory Committee and the Chief Epidemiologist, none of these individuals have been made available to parents and community members. Although we hear that they are meeting with City Schools regularly, weekly in fact, never, not once, has City Schools made any Health Advisory Committee member available to parents, students, or members of the general public to answer our questions, including why health metrics presented to us in October around positivity rates and cases per 100,000 were abandoned. As a parent and as the spouse of someone who must teach in City Schools, I am deeply concerned to know why these metrics were abandoned and
30
what
seconds,
the basis and what the basis was for that decision,
Schroeder, sorry.
including by the epidemiologist.
You keep speaking.
Thank
You have 30 seconds. Thank you.
The next speaker is Jocelyn Providence.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, my name is Jocelyn Providence. I'm a high school math teacher in Baltimore City Public Schools. One thing I do want to kind of check for all of us is our wording of what we're using. We should be making sure that we're always saying expanded in person and not reopening, because for teachers like myself who have been teaching this entire time throughout everything, schools have never closed. There is no reopening that's happening except for buildings. So we want to be very clear about that, because students, families, educators have been putting in the work this whole time. So nothing has closed for us. Next, I just want to also just reiterate the demands that are being made right now by the Baltimore Teachers Union. I know that a lot of people have said that, oh, like not every teacher needs to go back fully vaccinated, but actually the previous health commissioner, Dr. Lena Wynn, stated just today that, quote, I respectfully disagree with the CDC director that vaccinations aren't needed before teachers return. If in-person teaching is a society priority, as it should be, so should safety of teachers and school staff. I'm not going to read the whole quote because I know I have a limited amount of time, but I encourage people to look at that. And she was our former Baltimore City Commissioner, so I really think that we should be keeping that in mind. Second, I want to just reiterate our student voices, Kimberly and Marigold, and all of our student voices who took time, and our family who took time to come, but especially students who have been trying to be a part of this conversation. Like Kimberly and Marigold have been saying, there have been student demands that haven't really been addressed publicly. Maybe they have been addressed, but I know publicly they haven't, and I think the students deserve to hear answers and be a part of that dialogue. And I also just, again, want to reiterate the collaborative approach that Joe Kane was talking about in the PCAP presentation. That's all community members, educators, students want. We all want to be at the table. Thank you. We all want to be at the table, part of that, because of course this can be done safely, but it can't be done safely without all hands on deck, because we know it takes a community to raise a child, and we all want to be a part of that. And finally, I know I can't give questions, but two things I just wanted to say that I noted down is that there was SLCs mentioned, like the student learning centers. There have been no clear details whether that's going to be the same or different, expanded in person. Of course, it's going to be different because there's going to be more students in different grades involved, but that hasn't been clear to families. And also talking about MTAs and crowds, if we're thinking about the capacity that they have now, yes, sir. If we're thinking about the capacity that they have now, if we think about what it's like when students are on there, we have to take that into account, not just what it's like now, what it was like before when it was very crowded and a lot of standing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Keisha Goodwin. That's number 10. Ms. Goodwin?
Yes, good evening. I was listening to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was listening to the young man that was talking about transportation, and I had a question. The trips that they're giving to Culver, City Neighbors, Digital, Reginald Lewis, did they take those routes from other
You can't ask
schools?
questions.
Okay, well, if they can possibly post it somewhere, I would like to know, did they take those routes from other schools, thus leaving those students having to catch a different bus, and it may take longer for them to get to school? Also, I am a parent of a high schooler, and he has enjoyed virtual learning. Actually, he's made principals list first quarter and principals list second quarter. In previous years, he made honor roll. One reason is because he doesn't have to worry about bullying. When he's in the school building, there's a climate issue with students with bullying. He also doesn't have to worry about large class sizes. The class sizes are a little smaller in his pod, and he's getting more attention with his virtual teacher and his virtual tutor. And there's some other things that also contributes to his success, such as he's not in school for as long. He actually said, Mom, you know, I have 2 math classes, my regular math class and also physics. So if I was in a school building every day, I would have these 2 classes every day. How would I be able to manage
30 seconds.
the classwork and homework and everything else? But with the schedule he has now, he has math, social studies, and whatever one day, and then he has his physics, ELA class, and things like that in 90-minute periods. So it actually has benefited him to be virtual and to have his virtual tutor, and for things to be separated the way that it is. It's more actually a limited amount of time in school.
Thank you.
So with all of that being said, I think virtual need to last because it's not as safe as they say.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We now going to go to the councilperson, and so they know I'm asking the council, we must start off with myself, and then the committee members ask 2 questions, because we have 120 people waiting to have comments. My first question is public transportation. How is the district planning to maintain cohort integrity when we know the mask wearing and social distancing is not mandatory on the MTA? Pre-pandemic, approximately 25,000 students take the MTA. That's Mr. Kevin Quinn.
Sure. You know, as I noted in my presentation, we'll be adding 173 trips to the schedule. So that's 107 afternoon trips and 66 morning trips. So while I hear the point that you know, a lot of students are going to be joining into the system and riding the buses, I think, and we can't guarantee that there will be social distancing. I think what we're trying to do is put as much service out there on the street as possible so that kids are not cramped onto crowded buses.
Thank you. My second question is school nurses. Is the district engaged in talks with the city health department to get more nurses? A nurse at every school is needed to cross cohorts and spread of COVID.
No, thank you for the question, Councilman Stokes. So what we are doing, we absolutely are working with the health department. There are also certain functions that do not require a school nurse to perform, right? So with regards to the contact tracing, we work with the health department on contact tracing based on their guidelines, and we double check with them. But that, for example, is a function that does not require a school nurse. So what we have done with the health department and what we are doing now with some of the CARES dollars that we've received from the federal government is ramping up staffing to do that as we return to school.
Thank you. In this order, for the committee members, I'm gonna start off with Councilwoman Middleton, then Councilwoman Porter, then Councilman Bullock, Councilman Z. Cohen, Councilman Torrance, and then Councilman Glover. 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question has to do with vaccinations. I'm going by, I guess, just with some information that I received from people teachers trying to get vaccinated. And schools seem to be fending for themselves. Can either the health department or the school system give some kind of update on a process you're having for particularly teachers in getting vaccinated?
So, Councilwoman, I will start. I don't know. I know that Commissioner Zaraza did have to go to another meeting. She may have, I think she does have other representatives, but I'll just start from the school department perspective. So we are working in collaboration with the health department, and our arrangements with Johns Hopkins and University of Maryland Medical System are actually to help supplement what the city health department and other providers are providing. So part of why the relationship was significant and is significant is because it provides another means by which school district personnel can be vaccinated. It is still dependent on state supply. So part of some of the challenges, and we're working closely with the mayor as well as Dr. Daraza, is that as the supply becomes available and goes in ebbs and flow, what we're seeing is we can move people through quickly when it comes to, say, Hopkins and as we send out invites. So we've invited close to 5,000 school staff to be vaccinated. But that is also dependent on the flow of the supply. So as we're looking at the supply trends, that's also informing who we are sending out invitations to through city schools. But we also know that there are school staff that are, like the public, because educators are part of 1B, are going out on their own and signing up for vaccination. So it's not as if every city school's educator is being vaccinated through our relationship with Johns Hopkins and with
So are you paying attention to, I guess, some teachers are frightful because school is going to be opening or planning to be opened at a certain time. And there might be some teachers that are not vaccinated and they shouldn't be penalized. So if it gets to that point, are you planning to delay opening even more until every teacher is vaccinated?
Well, I will say this, Councilwoman Middleton, that we know already not every educator is going to want to be vaccinated. We already have people who have said they don't want the vaccine. What we are working towards is making as many spots available as possible, as well as the other mitigation factors that we know from the CDC, and we know from over half of US school children being back in schools have worked. The vaccine, again, is a priority, and we know that we want people to have it, which is why we were proactive in working with the health department, Hopkins, the mayor, and to get additional opportunities. But we also know, as verified by the CDC director today, and again, demonstrated experience in over half of the country, that when you have the other mitigation factors in place, you actually can still open school safely. So it is not an either or, it is a both and. So we're monitoring the supply. I have weekly conversations with the head of Hopkins, with the head of the mayor regularly, Dr. Zaraza, to kind of track what the supply is looking like coming into the city. But we also know, because we've done it since September, that you can open schools with other mitigation factors. But to your point, we're also putting pressure on the, making sure that there's supply, because we do want our educators and all city school staff. Like, actually, our first folks who were up for vaccinations were our food and nutrition workers, because they've been out since March. They've never been home. You cannot do food and nutrition virtually. So we actually prioritize those folks. Some of our paraprofessionals who have been in since we had student learning centers, they were prioritized. So we prioritized based on who actually has been in person the longest and who will be coming back. But we also know we can do it safely.
And you're maintaining the data on cases and outbreaks. That's my second question.
That's right. And so we are maintaining that data. One of the things that we are seeing, which is what the health department has been verifying with us along the way, is that absolutely and unfortunately, there are COVID cases that are arising amongst the entire population, which includes city school staff. But what we are seeing in the contract tracing is reflected in so many other workplaces, and that is the folks that are coming down with COVID. As unfortunate as that is, and as undesirable as that is, it's not happening as a result of them being in school. It is happening as a result of what is happening outside of the workplace.
Thank you, Chairman Stokes.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I just want to say thank you, Dr. Santalisa and your staff and the Baltimore Teachers Union for coming together on this very complex and complicated issue. My first question has to do with the vaccination or vaccination or COVID-19 protection effort for youth and young adults. So given the fact that the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine are unavailable for youth and young adults below age 16, you mentioned mitigation strategies for youth and young adults and back into the school. So one thing that I haven't heard was what is your plan of making sure that that PPE and protective gear is happening on a basis? Is that plan, ma'am?
Yes, I think so. But Councilwoman Porter, if I missed something just because you were in and out a little bit, which we all understand now, please let me know and I'll circle back. But with regard, I believe your question, and you can tell me if not, was around mitigation factors and PPE specifically with regards to younger students, since we know, since we don't have a timeline for a vaccine for students. Am I correct on that? Was that your question?
That is correct.
Okay, great. Okay, so
yes, that is correct.
Great. So what we have done is we have centralized the purchasing of personal protective equipment, namely masks, for our younger students. We have purchased and implemented desk shields. We have protocols that we've seen at use in our student learning centers, as well as in schools that are already open, to make sure we establish distancing. What we have noticed with regards to trends is that schools across the country that actually use those mitigation strategies see very, very low transmission rates amongst younger children. And so those mitigation techniques have been very successful across. We have seen with our own city school students that after reminders with masks, and I was in a kindergarten classroom, and I will tell you the teacher was amazing, and she had a routine and a song where young people were learning to make sure they keep their masks on. And we actually have not seen kind of widespread, not following the protocol amongst students. We've actually had to remind more of the adults in question to make sure they're following protocols. So our experience has mirrored what we have seen in other school districts that have safely opened with very little, if any, spread with younger children. Does that answer your question?
Sure. So it does. I would like to follow up with more of a concrete plan. So, how many personal protective gear per pupil? When are teachers working with them to change them because they cannot use the same mask on a daily basis or throughout the day as well, given the fact that given the fact that they are breathing with inside the mask. So I wanted to hear more of that. Mm-hmm.
Right. So what we are seeing is that a large number of families are sending their students to schools with masks by and large, like a large number are. What we do is provide masks at each school site. So if a school has a low supply, or if a student's mask is either insufficient or carried over from the day before without washing or anything like that, that's when teachers and principals have that supply to be able to provide that for any student. But there's great variance, right? So there are some families who are very sure that they're sending their children with a mask. So our supply is to make sure that masks are available, and when those supplies become low, we centrally provide those for each school. So principals are not, don't have to worry about placing their own order. We have purchased that PPE equipment.
Okay. And my second question is related to proper hand hygiene. So proper hand hygiene is very important to mitigating the spread of COVID-19. And you mentioned that as one of your mitigation strategies. The two high schools in my district that I have visited, particularly Sarah Academy and Franklin High School, have very poorly maintained bathrooms. So how, can you share how you expect students to properly hand wash in those type of conditions without soap or properly maintained bathrooms?
So one of the things that I would say is, first, we know that the water challenges throughout the district, right, sometimes make it difficult for every sink to be operational. We know that that's been true long before I came to Baltimore 10 years ago. So while we have made progress in that area, there are a couple of things that we've shifted. Number one, the purchase of soap. So we have centralized that purchase previously prior to February, March of last year. Again, schools were responsible for ordering the soap. And so if a budget ran low and a school ran out of soap, they were on their own. We completely redid that distribution system so that now if a school runs low on soap, all a principal has to do is flag that for us, and we centrally replenish that supply. The second piece with regards to cleaning and custodial protocols, we have increased the number, and I know Dr. Washington, our Chief Operating Officer, is here if you have further questions on it. But we have actually increased the custodial support at buildings because we heard from families some of what you're saying, and that is if that was the case before, why in the world would we believe it after? So what you'll see is hand sanitizing stations now in a number of schools and classrooms so that students have additional access to hand washing and hand sanitizing if there's challenges with washing, and that was not previously in place.
Thank you, Councilwoman Porter.
So much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you all for coming on.
Thank you.
Councilman Bullock. I believe I know he had to step away. Councilman Bullock. Okay, Councilman.
Mr. Chair, Councilman Bullock said that he needed to join by phone and he needs to be elevated to a panelist. My apologies for interrupting.
Councilman Bullock, you've been elevated.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity. Just a couple quick points, and I'll take a point of privilege here. So my question is, to the school system, under what circumstances would you reverse course either before or after the start of in-person learning? Are there certain metrics you'd be going by, or certain things that would happen that would change your mind?
Sure. So, Councilman Bullock, one of the things we have done since the beginning is we have monitored multiple measures as the state's knowledge and as the local health department and our medical advisory team have adjusted. So when people refer to the state guidelines around, for example, cases per 100,000 or particular rates, one of the things that we have been advised to do is to look at those rates in relation to one, particular sections of the city, what the trending looks like, what in-school or on-site transmission looks like. So for example, one of the things that we have seen across the country in schools that have opened, frankly, with even higher rates of infection than Baltimore City, is that schools that are following the mitigation factors actually have lower rates. So it's one of the reasons why, along with the health department, we're continually monitoring in-school transmission rates. The state is now monitoring on-site transmission rates so that we can actually make sure that we have clearer information about the relationship between in-school spread and community spread. And I would also say, Councilman Bullock, we've had instances already that under the advisement of the health advisory group, as well as the health department and Dr. Zaraz's team, where we have rolled back. So for example, in November, we were starting officially with 44 schools reopening. When we looked at some sections of the city and some of the concerns that the health department raised, as well as the health advisory committee raised, we actually rolled back the opening of those school sites based on the section of the city where they were and some of the trending that we were seeing. One of the reasons we did not expand in January was because of guidance we received from the health department, from the health advisory committee, and from watching other schools that had successfully opened, that we had expected a post-winter holiday increase. So we did not expand in-person learning during that time. So we're looking at those trends. We already have experience rolling back plans when the health conditions on a number of factors are pointing in the wrong direction. And then finally, I would say the health department continues to reinforce our mitigation strategies, our standard operating procedures. We were one of the first districts in the state this summer to have standard operating procedures that were verified by our health department and our health advisory committee. And so when those are in place, one, we have seen really successful mitigation. The other piece that I would say is we'll continue to roll back where we need to. That was one of the reasons we did not return to in-person learning after Thanksgiving. Originally we were, after we looked at the trending and concerns about what kind of each individual's behavior might be during the holiday. It was one of the reasons why we went entirely virtual the week after Thanksgiving. So from September, from the summer on, we have made adjustments based on what we are seeing in the data and what our medical advisory groups and the health department are signaling.
Okay, and then one quick follow-up question. So I do have two young boys in Baltimore City Public Schools, one in kindergarten and one in 6th grade. So I know there's a lot of talk about the K through 2 and K through 5, but again, thinking about middle schoolers, can you talk about the rationale in terms of what's happening with middle school? And that's going to be a challenge, obviously, for some families that have multiple children and what they do in different grade bands.
Yes, and I am one of those families as well, and I've gotten a lot of grief at home for not opening 6th grade. So I share your frustration at this point. One, because we've been committed to a slower phased reopening, and so there are some districts across the country that opened K through 8 or K through 5 initially. What we have done, you'll see, is in kind of 2-week waves.
we have promoted starting with K2, 3, and 5, based on those being the youngest students, what we know developmentally, what we know about the scheduling at those grade levels, and grade 9 because of some of the data that I referenced earlier and the long-term implications of disrupted schooling for 9th graders. We will be announcing in March the return schedule for grades 6 through 8 and grades 10 through 12. So part of what we are doing is, again, giving a slow steady, making sure the protocols are in place, and then bringing students back on. But grades 6 through 8 and grades 10 through 12 are definitely on our radar.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Torrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Dr. Santelises. Thank you, Dr. DeRosa, and the esteemed panelists, as well as President Brown. My first question is from Ms. Carolyn, who is a constituent of mine in Gilmore Homes, who's interested in bringing her students back. The question she has is, what does a typical day look like for our little people? She's very concerned because she understands the health issues that are faced by students and staff, but she wants to know how will her little person be protected in a typical day, and what does it look like?
No, that's a great question, Councilman Torrance, so thank you for surfacing it. And it's actually one of the reasons why we expanded or extended the dates before the return to school, because can you tell me the name of your constituent again? Is
Ms. Carolyn.
Ms. Carolyn, was because we heard questions like that from other families. So one of the things that Ms. Carolyn will be able to do is, one, go to an open house to actually see what it looks like for the children in her family. So in some schools, the social distancing looks like students with, the swimming pool noodles, those plastic swimming pool noodles that are cut to be a certain length so that little people can walk through the hallways safely with a recommended distance. In schools that already have outdoor spaces, we're encouraging, when weather permits, to make use of some outdoor time so that young people actually not only have exercise and time to be outside, but also because it's another way to have safe space. The other piece is Ms. Carolyn will be able to see her child's particular schedule, generally speaking, at that open house. So she should be able to have conversation with the principal, be able to see the spaces, see the actual hand sanitizing stations. One of the things that we've heard from parents whose children have returned is that being able to see those procedures in place prior to return or as their students return helped answer some of those questions for Ms. Carolyn. But I would say, she should look for the hand sanitizing stations. She should look for desk shields. She should see designated distancing guidelines for young people in the hallways. One teacher at one of our schools has a place where she reminds children to put on their masks using the bulletin board, using an open morning song. But those are things that we want families to be able to see for themselves.
Thank you, Dr. Santelises. The next question is from another constituent of mine, John, who was actually a teacher. He asks, how many students does city schools expect actually to return?
That is a great question. And so we're getting that feedback now from each individual school. Overall, what we have seen based on our previous experience is that on average, I'd say between 20 and 25% of families initially return because we know that for a lot of our families, they want to see it first. They want to know what's going on. Our schools that have already opened, you have parents who are looking into the classroom and seeing, but we have about, I'd say, a 20 to 25% trend overall. That will vary by school. So we know already that there are some schools that are already hearing 30 to 35 or 40%. of their students and families want to return. But generally speaking, based on what we've seen, I would say about 20 to 25%. And then as we, and this happened with our SLCs, we started out with about 30% of the spaces filled. And then as time went on over the next couple of weeks, we actually filled all of the spaces. So that's what we're anticipating at first. We think there'll be variability, and then there are schools who will have to go to a hybrid schedule depending on the numbers, if the numbers get too large to have all students in person at the same time.
I just have one follow-up, Dr. Santelises, for that. If they have to go hybrid, how many students are we expecting to be in each classroom with the teachers? I'm just wondering because of schedules, but also our little persons, how to manage that.
Yeah, I think that what we could do, and Dr. Washington could certainly talk about it, is because each of the classroom spaces are a different size, one of the things that our operations division has done is provided guidance around kind of how to organize the space in each classroom to make sure that we can maintain social distancing, but also know the number. So in one classroom, that number might be 12. In another classroom that's smaller, that number might be 8. So a lot of it is really dependent on the size of each classroom, but we can certainly, make sure that we forward that to you and make that available for parents. But it is going to vary based on the size of the room.
Thank you, Dr. Santelises. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Dr. Santelises. I want to take a moment to just appreciate the hard work that you and your team have been doing, as well as the incredible work of our educators, families, students, as we've all gone through this pandemic. You shared some really concerning data about how some of our students have struggled academically throughout COVID-19. We understand that adjusting to online classes has been extremely difficult for many of our children, in part because of the digital redlining that continues to haunt Baltimore. But we also know that digital literacy is critical to our students' long-term success. And I just want to take a moment to say how proud I am of the advocacy that students here in Baltimore City have done to close the digital divide. Just 2 days ago, Comcast announced that it was doubling the speeds of its Internet Essentials program. That hard-fought victory was won by students like the Somos Knights, Kimberly, Marigold, their teachers, council members, and community. Baltimore is leading the national conversation on closing the digital divide, and right now, we're winning. So why not double down on online learning until it is fully safe for everyone to come back to physical school buildings? And additionally, how will teachers teach both in person and online simultaneously?
Great, thank you, Councilman Cohen. I would agree that I think our city, including our students, have mobilized, and I would also commend you on your mobilization of resources around advocating for increased broadband. And from where I sit, it is not an either or. It is about giving families in every neighborhood, in every community, the choice to have a safe in-person learning. It is not about compelling all families to return. As you heard, even in tonight's testimony, and we've heard that there are young people who are thriving in this digital environment. They have increased their digital proficiency. And I would say that given the investment the city, including the city council, have made in expanding not just broadband, but access to devices for city school students, we now have more students with online capability, the access to virtual learning opportunities than we ever have before. That being said, I do think that we have an equal responsibility to serve the families who say that they need for their family and their children a safe in-person option. We need that. I feel we're compelled to do that. It is why we are still maintaining a virtual option. for exactly the reasons you say. I cannot make that decision for every family in this city, but I also know that there are families in this city that deserve to have the option to bring their children back because they believe that is best without me or anyone else dictating to them that they must remain virtual, particularly when we have demonstrated we can do it safely. With regards to your second question, and in terms of teachers and their teaching, I think some of the best feedback we've received, again, this will be part of the extended time, the extended 2 weeks that we announced yesterday. Some of the best resources we have are our teachers who, as you said, have been working hard, and we have many teachers who have been on the ground teaching both virtually and in person. And from them, and I meet weekly with a mixed group of teachers, some of whom are teaching online, some of whom are teaching virtually, and the exchange between them has allowed us to actually identify from a teacher perspective what the necessary supports are to do both when it is incredibly difficult. We knew that hybrid would be challenging. Teachers told us that, but I will also say, to your point, teachers have been our best source of what that looks like. So because of teachers who are teaching in person, we are now making investments or taking some of our investments in technology and using that to support those teachers who will be in person, because they have told us that it is actually, it is possible to have students live and virtual, but you need technology to do that. So based on their feedback, that's what we're doing. We've talked about different scheduling. And again, it's teacher leaders, folks on the ground, doing the work in person that have actually been informing a lot of what those adjustments need to be. So adjustments with scheduling, sharing about how you use, for example, aides and parent volunteers differently, how we deploy some of our CARES dollars, for example, to stipend, one school is stipending members of the community and parents for younger grades to help support that. So I agree. I think that that's challenging. It has been where we have been focusing a lot of that time. And again, the teachers on the ground doing the work in person have been some of the greatest sources of that information and have really helped inform how we're going to move forward with that.
Thank you. Quick follow-up. Wanted to take a moment to bolster the voices of our students in the city. Question is, how have student leaders been included in the school building reopening plans, and can you commit to involving students in all the decision-making around this moving forward?
So one of the things that I would say, it has actually been feedback from some student-led town halls that Hopkins has assisted, some of our community groups have assisted, that actually informed the return of 9th graders as well as some of the 12th graders. As a matter of fact, I got some emails yesterday from 12th graders who were not happy that they would be returning, that they would not be returning on the original date. And some of that feedback came from that. I would also say feedback from students on how to improve virtual learning. So some of those groups, some of those town halls that I've been a part of that have been facilitated, again, by community leaders, have been helpful in informing, for example, young people who said, look, with the virtual space, there's other things I want to learn about. So we have more entrepreneurship opportunities. That came from students. So yes, my commitment to hear from students continues. Students have informed where we are now, but always open to continuing that. I know that Chief Hike Hubbard is here and can certainly, if you have additional questions or additional information, we also have exchanges and dialogues with students scheduled in the coming weeks, because I could not agree more that student voice is important, and it has informed some of the shifts we've made in both virtual learning and in-person learning.
Thank you, Councilman. That's the second question, because we got a lot of people waiting. Councilman Glover?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Sanlisis, for attending our committee today. My question is, how often will students and staff be tested to monitor community spread? And who will conduct the tracing? And how would contact tracing be conducted?
Yes, so Councilman Glover, make sure I get your first question because I might have missed that one. But with regard, please, I'm sorry. Would you mind repeating your first question, sir?
So the first question is, how often will students and staff be tested to monitor community spread?
So one of the things that we're doing, and Chief Allison Perkins Cohen has been working on asymptomatic testing, which is one of the things that we have heard from the BTU and from others. And so we have been working on that even beyond that. In terms of how often, that's one of the things that we are working through with some partners. Actually, City Schools will be one of the first school districts in the state of Maryland to do asymptomatic testing. And there's a range of possibilities. So it could be once every 2 weeks, could be once every 3 weeks. What we're looking at is districts that currently have testing in place and then adjusting based on what some of their learnings are. But Chief Perkins Cohen can definitely give you a full briefing on that because she's been working with that. But a lot of what we're looking at now, for example, in the state of Colorado, where you have an overwhelming number of schools that have regular testing of students. In some places, that happens every 2 weeks that students are tested. In some places, it might be once a month. But, and I know that there was reference to the one van, that is for symptomatic testing. What we are talking about putting in place is asymptomatic testing.
Okay, well, the next question is,
does that answer your question or no?
I mean, it doesn't really answer the question because, one, we're not Colorado. And the one thing I do notice is that, me, myself, I have kids that attend, public schools. I think in the beginning, it was a challenging issue because it was new, it was different. And like the first quarter, grades were like down a little, but they've gotten them up to like A's and things of that nature. But I think the biggest problem that we're having is that the parents and students aren't being heard. Like we're asking questions to the school board, but the ones that really need to be sitting at the table are the students and the parents. And I just feel as though just me knowing a lot of teachers personally that their voices aren't getting heard, and they're relying on individuals such as me and my colleagues to pose those very, very important and difficult, probably questions to ask. And moving forward, I just hope that that ask is being, filled. That our students, along with their parents, are having conversations with you and your school board to move forward. I know that excuse me, Mr. Chair, but I know that even when students have to ride the bus to go to school, like who's really monitoring like the MTA buses when students are coming to school with individuals that are going to work. And we don't know if they're bringing along, COVID-19. Kids don't wear the mask all day long. My kids don't do it. Kids feel as though if they're around, family and friends is okay. But I think we need to look more serious into listening to these teachers. These are the ones who we rely on to help educate our children. And again, I don't feel like as though our teachers are even getting heard. So
well,
that's what I wanted to add with.
Okay, thank you, Councilman.
Thank you.
Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. Dr. Santelises, can you, as we look to transition to expanded in-learning opportunities for our students, can you talk a little bit about your plans to expand testing opportunities in addition to the partnership with Johns Hopkins as well as University of Maryland Medical System?
Sure, absolutely. And I would ask Chief Perkins Cohen, since this is the second round of testing questions, Councilman Costello, I would ask Chief Perkins Cohen, would you like to come and give some additional detail about where we are with our asymptomatic testing?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So a couple things. So we have in place the symptomatic testing that we've talked about, which is, pretty unusual. We've talked a lot to different districts across the country and in the state, and haven't really seen evidence of anybody who has a partnership like that. So we're very grateful to University of Maryland Medical System for that. And that allows us on a daily basis to go on site to any school to test any student or staff who has symptoms. And we have now expanded that based on the advice of our health advisory group to also include close contacts. So that would be some asymptomatic testing going on. So if I have symptoms, then also anybody who's a close contact of mine, when the van comes from the convention center, would test those individuals as well as we are talking to them about expanding to also be the entire pod. So that would be another way to expand it. Then in addition to that, we're looking at saliva-based testing, PCR testing, that PCR is the gold standard of testing. And so we are looking at that for staff and students in high school. So we're looking particularly to focus some of the additional resources in high school, because we know high school is harder, that students are more likely to get COVID and they have to move through their classes. So it's harder to keep them in a pod. So for that reason, we are particularly looking at more testing in high school. So we're looking at, again, the PCR saliva-based test. Possibly what we're thinking about is every 2 weeks for high school students and high school staff, and then monthly for elementary school students is what we're thinking about right now. That's quite robust. We've been looking at, again, other places where they have testing in place and have been in school for a long time, and many places don't have quite as frequent as testing as that. And again, the results across the country are that there's very limited evidence of transmission in school systems that have been open to more students than we have for a long time.
Thank you, Dr. Santelises and Chief Perkins Cohen. Second question has to do with academic performance. I'm curious what you're seeing at the district level in terms of students that are coming back to take advantage of the expanded in-classroom opportunities and how they're performing compared to how they were performing prior to those in-person opportunities.
Yes, and thank you, Councilman Costello. I will say now that some of that data is not kind of broad with regards to what we were showing you from Q1, but some of it is anecdotal. And what we've anecdotally heard, for example, from one of the ESOL teachers who is part of the teacher advisory group that I meet with around instruction, said that she can tell that her ESOL students that are in person are anywhere from 2 to 3 months ahead of in skills where her students that are remaining in virtual are. That she could see in terms of language development, almost the immediate difference in the in-person. The other piece we're seeing in some of our alternative schools that have opened, that what they are seeing is young people who had checked out, for whom the virtual was not working. Again, there are some that for whom virtual learning is working. What they're seeing is a slow return back to just the relationship. And so they're seeing the affect, the engagement shift. We'll be monitoring that more closely with data as more students return. But the number one themes are just engagement, social emotional health. We've heard from parents, children that just, again, for whom virtual was not working, when they have been returning, they can see the difference in just, decreased depression, far more engagement. One parent described it as, my child's back to her old self again, almost. And so what we're seeing is that in advance of a lot of the academic gains, we're seeing the social emotional reconnections happening for a number of young people who are returning, and we'll be monitoring it. But I don't have similar data sheets, or figures that we had earlier, but we certainly will be monitoring that. But I will say anecdotally, again, from teachers who are actually in person doing the work, they're seeing it in some of the kids that they either had not seen since the beginning of the year or who had regressed.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'd certainly be interested in that data if you don't mind requesting that the school system send that over as it becomes available to the committee.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilwoman Odette Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. First, I want to also give a shout out to the Somos students, City Knights and D14. Way to go. Excellent work. And continue that work. I'm very proud of you. I also want to give a shout out to the community schools coordinators across the city. They have been amazing during this time, making sure that our students have computers, that their families are doing okay. And I really value the community schools program, and I want to work hard to expand it because it has proven to work, particularly during the crisis. So I want to give a shout out to our community schools coordinators and to the Child First Authority and the Y and others who are coordinating them. Dr. Santelises, I know you find yourself in a tough spot. As you know, me and some of my colleagues wrote an op-ed in September basically calling for supports for our families so that virtual can work. What we called for was for employers to be flexible so that mom or dad or whoever is the caretaker could actually stay home and make virtual work. We called on Comcast to do their job back then to make the digital divide and internet available. We called for making sure that people were supported to an end to eviction and other types of supports. None of that happened. None of it. So what we find ourselves
Councilwoman, you know we need 2 questions.
Yeah, I got it. Okay. What we find ourselves with is, a position where we are now, where students are feeling like they're not supported, families are feeling not supported, and so the school system saying, okay, we've got to support our families. So I understand the position that you're in here, and it's too bad that we couldn't get the supports that were really needed when we needed them. But my first question, can you talk a little bit about our students who are special education students? I know that in some cases there are times when virtual is not right for our special education students, but I also have people telling me that their special education students have finally figured it out, and this adjustment to going back to school might be tough for them, but also making sure that their IEPs transfer and everything else. Can you talk a little bit more about the impact for our special education students?
No, thank you, Councilwoman Ramos. One of the things that I would say with regards to our students with disabilities is that, one, I think the good news is that because, to your point, we did have to shift to virtual, one of the things we're finding that has been successful has been for some students being able to receive more different types of services virtually than we had been before. So that piece is really helpful. What we are doing with regards to the shift is, again, if families feel like, look, we're on a rhythm now, we've got it going now, I don't want to rock the apple cart, they don't have to. Right? So again, we're not saying that in order to be serviced, students with disabilities need to return in person. What we did was prioritize very early, beginning back in September, the return of our students with disabilities, particularly those with disabilities that it was much more difficult for a virtual setting to actually meet their needs. So we have been all along prioritizing students with disabilities. Dr. Deb Brooks and her team worked really on making sure that any family who needed IEP support, that was a real question for a lot of families, like what's going to happen to my child services, their IEPs. Actually went through with families early in the spring, any adjustments they wanted made based on the virtual placement. But then for families who said this service just isn't working being delivered virtually, we'd like an in-person option, we prioritized those families to come back in person. So again, families are not being compelled to return. If a family is uncomfortable, if a family wants to wait and see how it works, or if a family says, look, it's February now, we're on a rhythm, they certainly don't have to return. And more than happy to ask Dr. Brooks if you have more specific questions, either about makeup of services, families getting IEP support, any of that, more than happy to you can either forward us those questions, or I can, ask if Dr. Brooks is here now.
Is that okay, Mr. Chair, if Dr. Brooks is here?
First let me ask, is Dr. Brooks here?
No worries, we'll follow up.
Okay, but more than happy, if you want to forward those questions, we'll make sure we get those to her.
And then my second question is, I didn't hear exactly what will happen, as we've stated that, lots of families might look into this option because of, childcare needs and working and all of that. And so what is the plan if too many kids want to come back? What is it that will end up happening if there's only 12 kids allowed in a class? And this is in particular for the high school. They can't get away from each other. So, how's that going to work? Does the principal then make a decision and say, oh, we've got too many kids, sorry? Or does the principal make a decision saying, no, we're just going to take those kids who need it most? We've not had that conversation about what happens in that scenario because like I said, we haven't had family support, so there might be too many that want to join, and we need a plan for that.
Councilwoman, what is the question?
I answered that question. I asked the question.
All right, thank you.
So thank you for that, Councilwoman. And that is something that we're monitoring now as replies come in from families. We will, if possible, for example, one of the things that we know now in schools that are already kind of close to that point because they have large numbers of families who want to return in person, those schools would need to shift to hybrid days. And so what that would mean is schools right now, I'd say an overwhelming majority of schools have students in person 5 days a week, particularly when there are low numbers. In situations where those numbers are increasing, I'd say the first approach as of right now is to move to part of the week in person and part of the week hybrid, which is what other school districts have done when numbers have risen. I think the other piece that we would need to do at some point, which fortunately we have not had to do, and that is to make sure that, if need be, there's a cutoff, right? So that we'll be able to say to families, we've reached the point for in-person that we might need to hold before we add additional families. In cases where we know that already, those schools are already planning for multiple days, what we call an A day, B day, which some school districts have implemented, meaning, and it was one of our early discussions, and that is students would come 2 days a week for in-person and 2 days a week virtual. And that also helps keep the numbers low. But as we move forward with numbers, that is definitely something we're monitoring and are seeing in some schools already.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Councilman Conway, and after Councilman Conway is Councilman Burnett. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll make my questions brief. I know we have a lot of comments to come. I've got two very simple questions. One to Dr. Santelises. We were talking a little bit about the data, and I'm really curious if we have tried disaggregating the data by race and by socioeconomic status in order to get a better understanding of the disparities in the impact of the current plan, and hopefully understand how we want to tackle that going forward. You're muted.
Sorry about that, sir. Councilman, were you speaking specifically to a specific kind of data when you asked about the disaggregation?
Yes, yes, specifically grades, failures, GPAs, the same stuff that you currently have, but if we could use that by race and socioeconomic status, we know that this pandemic is going to have huge impacts into the future, and especially on learning. I'm curious if we started looking at that yet.
Yes, we have, Councilman. So we know, I just didn't want to include all of the slides, but we know, for example, there has been greater, more significant impact on the grade front, for example, for our English language learners. We know for I'm trying to think, English language learners, students with disabilities, actually there was not as large a gap as we anticipated. And there could be a number of reasons for that. And then we usually disaggregate by ethnicity and race. And so we're seeing that in an overwhelmingly African-American district, we are seeing, some of those gaps emerge, not consistently, but I think one of the biggest things we're seeing is that even our higher performing students, so when we disaggregate based on A's and B's, and again, we heard some stories tonight of kids who have actually increased their grades by being home because they don't have all the distractions of the school setting, and that is very real. However, we are also seeing kind of disproportionate impact on students of color at every grade level and performance band. But we're also seeing that young people who need to work, there are young people at the high school level who, I've said in other occasions, we are not going to get back unless we are very deliberate about recruiting them back, because making $15 an hour in Amazon means that you're going to be chronically absent at some point. So we're seeing some of those trends, and we've been diving into them, but we're more than happy to forward you any of the disaggregated data for you to dig into it yourself.
I'm a data nerd, so I'd appreciate that. Thank you. And my second question actually is to the gentleman from MDOT about transportation. We know that when we have backups in buses, that's when you end up having too many folks on a bus. That's natural. Have we thought about approaches to that as we open schools, and how to prevent that from becoming a problem?
Thank you, Councilman. Just to clarify your question, how to prevent kind of overcrowding from happening?
Exactly.
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing that we're doing is we're adding more bus trips to the system. So I noted that we're adding 173 bus trips. So that's taking kids from neighborhoods to their schools. 107 in the afternoon and 66 in the morning to be exact. I think as we roll those out, certainly we will be very sensitive to where we need to add buses, right? So let's say we roll those out and we see that, there might be one or two buses that those kids decide that they're going to walk or take a different route instead. We may be able to reduce service there, or there may be other routes where we need to add service. And so we do have some of that flexibility to kind of plug in additional buses where needed if we see overcrowding become a problem. We do have technology on the bus that where we have passenger counters that can give us data to be able to evaluate. And I'm sure we'll get calls from you and from other parents, concerned if they do see overcrowding conditions, and we'll certainly be responsive to that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. If I may ask a follow-up question.
I got Councilman Burnett has been waiting for a while, so let me go and get him. We'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Councilman Burnett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry about that.
Am I coming through? Am I coming through?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for joining us this evening, all the city school staff, parents, and most importantly, our student activists who've been raising a number of these concerns about returning and really applying pressure that I think has been much needed to make sure that this plan is solid. Dr. Sinalisis, the question I had, because a lot of what I wanted to talk about today has already been asked, but one of the concerns that was raised to me by a parent in my district was after school and out of school time, and what considerations for parent schedules. Obviously, we know that during this virtual learning, it creates its own set of challenges, but for a parent that their children are home in that virtual learning environment, and so the pressure has been relieved for them to be able to pick up their student on time, their young person on time if they're not comfortable with them getting on a bus. Are there considerations for the school day or alterations to the hours to accommodate those parents and those families?
Apologies. No, thank you, Councilman Burnett. And part of why I was nodding is because we too have been hearing some of that. And I don't yet have kind of a standard answer for after school, because so many schools use partners for some of that after school time. And so I do think it's a flag for something that we need to make sure in school orientations that families will have access to. I will say this, that early on in the pandemic, as we were rolling out our student learning centers, the great part was we had a number of partners who stepped in for during the school day time. Now that we're shifting from that, there is hope that some of those partners who stepped in on student learning center time will now be able to step back into the extended school day space in supporting schools with that. But with regards to kind of a blanket answer, I would say no, I don't have kind of a blanket answer, but I think you're flagging one of the things that we've noted in terms of if we're going to expand in-person learning, we're going to have to make sure that we transition from student learning centers, which is why we sent families notice, so that some of our partners will then be released to then, like Rec and Parks, to actually support extended school day. But it's definitely something that we're going to note to make sure are part of the school by school orientations for families and our Q&A sheet, because it's a great point.
Thank you. I think that definitely is something that will be a part of any parent's calculus on whether they'll return or not. The second question I had, and this is actually a question for both you and Mr. Quinn from the MTA, what are the mechanisms in place for students, staff, parents to raise issues about sanitary practices? Councilmember Porter mentioned, soap in bathrooms and that kind of thing. How are people able to come forward in a way that there won't be any retribution, anonymous complaints, that kind of thing? What are the mechanisms in place for people to be able to raise that issue? And the reason I'm asking is, I don't doubt that there's been a tremendous amount of time put into this plan, but I know that implementation is very much a school by school basis, and having that buy-in at each school is the execution is going to be mixed. It's inevitable. And so what ways can people come forward with the concerns in schools, and for Mr. Quinn on the buses, how can people come forward if they have concerns?
So I'll start with that. I do think that, part of what we've had throughout the pandemic is, for example, call lines for families to get assistance to raise issues. Those things will still be in place. I do think that one of the pieces where it would be very good to get feedback and continued feedback from some of our parent partners really is around what are the ways that we continue to communicate so that we hear first themes of parent concerns, right? So if there are themes that are emerging across schools, how do we make sure we address them? With regards to, my child's school does not have soap, or I'm not seeing, enough PPE, that has traditionally gone first through the principal, and then when a family does not think that they are getting the response they need, they can go through the ombudsman, they can go through our community engagement office. And I think one of the things that would be great to get additional feedback on is, do we need another hotline, right? Like, do we need a hotline similar to what we've had previously for families to get help? So we put helplines in place in the spring, and I could easily foresee the need to have something similar if families feel like, look, I don't want to go through my local school, I want to be able to just flag it somewhere. I think we have the infrastructure still in place from the spring to be able to lift something like that up if we're getting feedback from families that would be helpful to kind of have that hotline for another place for that to come through.
Yeah, I think one, if we can get that information out, I'm happy to help disseminate it. Obviously to my constituents, and I'm sure my colleagues will be as well. But I think that's the key piece, is making sure that people can come forward. They may not always feel comfortable raising it to a teacher and to a principal directly, especially staff. So that's something that I'd like to see and help push out as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Real quick before Councilman Torrance, before you have a follow-up, I just have a follow-up for Dr. Sandalisa. Councilman Bullock asked a question about matrix. Would you give the detail to determine if schools should close, if there's an outbreak in a school, what are the metrics to close if the community spread gets worse?
So I think the follow-up for that, Councilman Stokes, is one, we're still looking at, transmission rates, right? So we haven't stopped looking at what those transmission rates are. So that's number one. Number two, we're still looking at rates per 100,000. We're still looking at that. And we are also looking at transmission rates within schools, because part of what we are monitoring is, yes, what does the community spread look like? And those are the same figures that are on the Baltimore City dashboard that the health department updates regularly, as well as what in-school transmission looks like. So when we sit down with the health department and the health advisory, we're also looking at transmission rates based on contact tracing that have occurred within schools. So those metrics have not changed. I think where there is a difference of opinion is that what we have received advisement on, both from the state as well as from our local health officials and our health advisory commission, is that there's not one indicator that says now you close down schools. It's part of why we look at rates of transmission across the city, rising rates across the city, because there are some places where those rates are increasing based on neighborhood. So those are the rates, that's the data. Even the state has adjusted based on what they're seeing and based on who they're seeing can open safely. So those data points are there. Where there is a point of disagreement is there is not a single indicator that is a go, no go. And I think that's where the rub is, quite frankly.
So my fellow, what metric would you use to determine if schools should close and there's an outbreak? What are metrics you use to close if community school spread gets worse? What metrics are you going to use?
We're looking at those same metrics, sir, the same ones that are on the community health department website. We're looking at, and in consultation, so I'm not always monitoring hospitalizations like Dr. Zaraza is, but if that reaches a point When
Okay.
she has concerns, we do that. We're looking at rates per 100,000. We are working at rates of spread, and we are looking at on-site and in-school transmission rates, which is what most school districts across the country that are open are looking at, and that even our own state has decided they are looking, which is why they made an adjustment to their metrics, because Maryland had a far greater percentage of their schools closed, of our schools here closed. And so
Okay.
that is what we're monitoring.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I did say Councilman Conway, but I meant Councilman Torrance had a follow-up.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Santalisa. Actually, my follow-up is for MTA. My transit 9 went off. I'm worried because I think about frontline workers that having to travel and bravely difficult using MTA. We learned from the data that you guys provided from September to now that our frontline workers. Am I breaking up? Oh, 1 second.
Yeah, you breaking up. Sorry.
Can you guys hear me better now?
Yes.
Perfect. My question is concerning the routes. One of the things is I'm concerned, like, how can we, have you thought about the ridership that will increase from our students? And then also because a number of our frontline workers who are exposed to the virus more often will be traveling along the same routes as our students. How are we going to put in the touchless systems in place so that our students aren't impacted? I just want to figure out what is your current operating in terms of how they enter the bus, how they exit the bus, how they're making the payment, especially with their cards, and then how are we prioritizing the number of buses added to the specific routes that service our schools?
Sure. So, so again, going back to some of the overcrowding concerns, we're adding a number of trips. In terms of the contactless payment, the kids will use the same cards that they've always used. And so they'll enter and exit the bus as they always have. You raise a good point about the students riding with the rest of the public, and per FTA law, we have to do that. We are not by FTA law, we cannot specify who can and cannot ride. All of our buses, even the school trippers that I talked about earlier, have to be by law open to everyone. And so we can't make just a school buses solely for school students. We're the public transportation provider for everyone, not just the school students. That said, we try to add service and work with the school system to put in specific routes that do help students get to schools. And so, again, I think the best that we can do is keep an eye out for the overcrowding concerns. I didn't get a chance to kind of answer the question earlier about if people do have overcrowding concerns. But, best way to do that is our customer service line, 410-539-5000 is our line that's on all of our bus stop signs. I personally, along with our senior leadership, get a report every single night of all the calls that came into our call center. And we take that data and add buses where we can. I will note that, we are limited in our number of buses. We don't have unlimited buses. We have a limited bus fleet and a limited number of operators. But that said, I think we come to the table and to this conversation absolutely willing to work with the school system and the school kids to be sure everyone's as safe as possible.
Thank you. Councilman Conway, I believe you had a follow-up.
No, not necessary anymore. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you. We are going back to our hand-raised callers.
Okay, the next speaker will be Jeffrey Washington. Mr. Washington?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Chairman, council members, Dr. Santelises, and others. My name is Jeffrey Washington. I'm the president of the Federal Hill Preparatory School PTO. Our school is not a private school, is not a charter school, but proudly is a Baltimore City pre-K through 5 public school. Indeed, I myself have 2 children in Baltimore City schools, one in middle school and another in elementary school. Our school is made up of families from across Baltimore City. Indeed, approximately 70% of our students come from outside of our school zone, and approximately 75% of our school population is African American. Over half of our families have informed the school of their choice to return to school in person. And indeed, the concern I hear most frequently from families is for a return to in-person learning. And what motivates that is a profound concern for obvious learning loss amongst students under virtual learning. I do want to start by recognizing and commending the teaching staff and administrators for their tireless efforts in ensuring that student access to learning has continued uninterrupted during this past year. But we also must recognize that despite those heroic efforts, there is abundant data that children are actively being harmed under the virtual learning environment, which is clearly deficient for many children and families. What families want is an option for their family to be able to choose what is appropriate for their child, and that is currently not available to them. Baltimore City needs a strong educational system to build its young people to have skills needed to succeed and thrive in life, and that will not happen if children are not proficient in reading and math and do not achieve grade level proficiency on time. I thank you all for this time.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Miguel, last name spelled C-E-R-V-A-N-T-S space D-E-L space T-O-R-O.
Good evening, council members. This is Miguel Cervantes del Toro, and I'm the proud principal of Callaway Elementary in Baltimore. And Callaway Elementary is a pre-K-5 elementary school in Northwest Baltimore in District 6. And I come here today before you to share the value of in-person learning to our families and students. Callaway has been an in-person learning site since November. And in preparations for this meeting, I talked to families about the value of having sent their children to school and that have been with us since November. And initially I thought I knew what it meant to families. And after talking to families, I realized that the impact is far more reaching than I thought. For example, their families share with me that we are their village and they cannot do this alone, and they're counting on us. I spoke to a family where the mom is a single parent and they're a first responder and they have to be at work full time. I also spoke to another family whose children in an early learning program receive special education services that must be provided in school. I also spoke to a family where English is not the first language at home, and the parents rely on school instructors to help and support students with their assignments and in-school learning. I also spoke to another family where, due to medical reasons, they're not able to support their children and be there with them at home to support them with learning. For these families, in-person learning, and I quote, has made all the difference in ensuring access to an education, in allowing their children to make progress on areas such as speech and language, in being in a safe learning environment, and receiving one-on-one attention that otherwise would not be available. In my conversations with family, they share that initially they were concerned with health and safety of their children. Once they learned and experienced the protocols in place, they were put at ease, relieved, and felt comfortable. They were grateful when their children came home telling them all about their day at school. They were thankful when they saw their children made more progress in person. I recall a time when the children first started at school, one of our kindergarten students shared with me that Callaway was the best school ever as he engaged with his peers in learning. To date, we have over 60 families who have shared an interest in participating in in-person learning. When asked why they were interested, some share that they needed help and support from what they have known to be their village. They could not do it alone and needed us to continue to ensure academic growth and their children's well-being. They are worried and observe their children at home disengaged, sometimes unmotivated and eager to be in proximity with their friends. They need us to be able to seek employment that was lost due to having to stay at home as the result.
Mr. Gale, you have 30 seconds.
They need us to continue to be a partner. And I probably, as I speak to you all here today, I share the value of in-person learning with families at Callaway, the families that I serve. Perhaps because as a parent myself, the school setting is my village as well. And that is all I have in ensuring the success of my child. And I believe that all should be afforded the same opportunity. Thank you all for listening to me today. Have a safe and wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Next speaker, Shamar Hodge.
Good evening. I am a parent. I'm a single parent of two students that attend Empowerment Academy. This is their first year there, and it's new. So my youngest one has attention deficit, and she's struggling, but it does help that she has a tutor that comes twice a week that partnered with their school. And as long as the school is, doing their best to keep our children safe, I would be for them going back to school. And also, it's been very hard on my children emotionally. I now have my 12-year-old in counseling because of her difficulty adjusting to virtual, and it would be more supportive if they were in school. And it makes it also harder for them when they are also, this is a new school for them. So it's like the anxiety level for both of them will be even more intense when they go in person because it's a new school. But I believe that Empowerment Academy will do any and everything in their power to make sure that our children are safe. And but I believe it's best if they return to school in person. The socialization will be is very important for our children to socialize. And being in isolation like this, like I said, my oldest is in counseling because she's depressed and not in front of everyone like far as in school. They need that human contact in order to relate and to build new relationships with the new teachers and the new students.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Tamitha Woodhouse.
Oh, Tom. That was great. Thank you, because I was nervous.
Thank you for being patient. We appreciate it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name
is because they were supposed to be over at 7:00.
Wow, yeah, this one on. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
If it go past 8,
Good
I'm just
afternoon. My name is Tamitha Woodhouse, and I'm the principal of Renaissance Academy. Renaissance Academy in-person program has been open since the summer, and I can say that we've been successful at doing that. And the reason for that success is not because of me as a principal, it's because of the teachers who volunteered and the students who stepped up. They developed and helped structure our
teachers do so much.
They really allowed
in general, period. Their teachers do so much.
I'm hearing
I'm hearing two voices.
Oh, I think y'all still have my mic on. For Shamar Hodge, you still have my mic on.
Am I clear, Councilman Stokes?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So the teachers own this, and they really designed it with our students on how they were going to enter the building, and they really structured it the way that they wanted it to be with their students. I think a lot of times when I was charged with opening in the summer, and I talk about and think about the opportunity gaps, I think we forget about the kids who do not have parents. I think we forget about those kids who are being raised by their great-great-grandparents, their great-great-aunts, and those students who don't have a home. So where do they go during the day? Just in this meeting alone, I am now trying to find an Airbnb for a family who is squatting in a vacant home. I have 4 families like that this winter. So where do those kids go during the day? And I've had to say, come to the school, and I'm glad we were open to welcome them into the building, not only so that they could be not be cold, but also that they can get food. I have another student who is a young adult who's on his own. His parents passed away and he refused to go into a foster care system. He comes to the school for food. So these are real stories. And I think we often think that our kids, everyone has a parent. Everyone has a home. That is not the case for everybody in Baltimore City. So I opened up and took this charge for those kids and those families who do not have a voice. I have an 81-year-old great aunt who's taking care of a special needs kid now. And she called and she said, can he please come in person? I know the time has been pushed back, but I need him in person. So I think we have to have options for those young folks. One size does not fit all. Every family may not want in person. Every family may not want virtual, but there are some voices here that are not being heard at all. And someone has to speak up for our homeless students, our students who have been raised by their great-great-grandparents and great-great-aunts, our kids that have no family at all. That voice has to be heard, and we have to make sure that they have a safe place to go to. And I'm going to say this in closing. I have buried more high school students and went to more high school funerals due to gun violence than I have COVID. And I think that has to be addressed.
Thank you, Ms. Woodhouse. Appreciate it.
Next speaker is Tracy Pratt.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Tracy Pratt. I'm the principal of Sandtown Winchester Achievement Academy. Sandtown has grades pre-K through 8. So also, like Principal Woodhouse, I've also had in-person learning since the summer. We started with 5 classes, grades 1 through 5 in the summer. I also have 3 self-contained special education classes that started in the summer and we still have in the building. I host a SLC. So on any given day, we may have 80 to 100 adults and students in our building. And so far, we have not had any positive cases. And I can definitely say that I contribute that to having smaller class sizes and following the guidelines of our that are in our standard of procedures. I'm not sure if everyone ever had a chance to look at it, but it's very detailed. I can always go to it to answer any of the questions that I had. And we've also been provided with the safety measures, safety tools, resources that we need. We have desk shields for all of our classes. Our kids have masks, hand sanitizing stations. And as a school, we've also set up our operating procedures. So just making sure that teachers, students, and parents are following those as written. We've been able to open up very successfully. And for us to open now, we have over 60% of our parents that are interested in their kids coming back. And many of those reasons are the same one that Principal Woodhouse just shared. For us, the number one reason is that there is no one home to help kids get online virtually while parents are at work. So many of our grandparents, great-grandparents are raising our kids and no one is there to help them. So I'm glad that we've been able to provide this service for them. And I would like to continue that when we open back up in March. So thank you for listening. And Any questions that you have for me, I'm at Sandtown, Winchester. You can give us a call. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, Brittany Johnston.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Brittany Johnstone. I'm a school psychologist in the district. I just wanted to speak tonight on some of the points that were made about social emotional learning and the provision of mental health services for students in the district. I am curious why, if social emotional learning is such a priority for the district, why we continue to underspend the social emotional learning budget year after year, and yet we overspend on the school police budget. Additionally, folks have mentioned tonight concerns about mental health provision for students who are struggling right now. I would like families and the council members present tonight to be aware that as a clinician in the district, a majority of my services will continue to be provided virtually because the district admits that these cannot be provided safely across cohorts and pods for students who are in person. So the virtual services that I provide now for students is what it's going to look like moving forward, because it is not safe for me to see a student in first grade and then pop over to 8th grade and then go see a 7th grader and then go over to the high school I work at and see the 10th grader there. So I just want us to be very clear about what these supports will look like moving forward for our students, and that, you know, we're kind of being sold a bill of goods as far as what can change and what we have in our control. So I thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Franca Mullapaz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Franca Mullapaz. I'm a teacher in Baltimore schools and also a building representative for City College High School. I want to reiterate that teachers want to come back to school. We miss our students. I miss being able to be with them and the activities we would do together and getting to build relationships with our kids. But what we want is for schools to be open safely. I reiterate the demands of the BTU, and these are basic demands that need to be met so that we can open safely for our teachers and our families. We need city school staff to be fully vaccinated. We need ventilation upgrades that work and that it is completed before students return. We need those minimum public health metrics, which have been frequently denied any specifics during this meeting. And those metrics need to be met for at least a week before expanding in-person programming. And we need a robust, reliable, proactive testing program that doesn't rely on one hand for students and staff. And it must be for both symptomatic and asymptomatic individuals before expanding in-person programming. The fact is, as Commissioner Brooks told us, that Black people are 3 times more likely to die from COVID-19 than white people. And the burden of the disease, as he said, must be weighed against the reality that racism means that Black communities will pay a higher cost if exposed. The same is true for our Latinx community. As Bishop Bruce of Sacred Heart shared with us, he said, "We started weeping in April and we haven't stopped weeping. And you wonder how many more tears can one community cry?"
This would be the last raised hand. I don't know if his hands.
Between March and May, in the Johns Hopkins Health System, 42% of Latino patients tested positive for COVID, compared with 17% of Black patients and 8.8% of white patients. The proportion of cases among Latinos was at least double what could be expected of the basis of populations in 11 states. And in 11 states, it was 3 times as high. In Maryland, Latinos represent 10% of the state's population, but 23% of COVID-19 cases.
30 seconds.
In our city, thank you. And our city has the highest zip code of COVID deaths in the Latinx population, and they sit in Councilman Cohen's district. From the leader of the School Nurses Union, Wendy, the nurses of the BPS during this time are absolutely frustrated. She has said repeatedly that we don't have the proper PPE and we don't have the physical staff to handle opening up schools in a pandemic. We are already in a critical point at schools. This may actually be what breaks nursing in Baltimore City schools. In addition to the health risks of contracting COVID, we need to remember that this disproportionately affects Black and brown lives. And we know that it's not just about getting sick. So many of our families live paycheck to paycheck, and the economic burden of losing an income due to illness or hospital bills, in addition to the financial burden of the pandemic, could send our already struggling community members into an economic freefall. Expanding in-person learning prior to ensuring it's safe, prior to making sure these demands are met, will put the entire Baltimore City community at risk. We want to go back. We are dying to go back, but we want to do it safely. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more caller.
And his name or her name's first name is spelled Kiegan, last name Montgomery.
Yes, good evening, members and Baltimore City schools and everyone else on the call. I'm a District 12 resident and I work as a city schools teacher in Greektown. As an ESOL teacher, my students' digital literacy has drastically increased. They can do synonyms and questions about the Apollo 11 faster than I can sometimes ask. And this has been a drastic improvement since I have access to computers. My administration has done their utmost to answer questions, but staff still have several concerns. One major concern is the bathroom, as Councilmember Porter addressed. I work in a 21st century school, and yet pre-pandemic, we would still run out of soap. And soap wasn't provided in any of the classrooms either. The teachers would have to purchase their own. My school also only has 3 bathroom stalls for girls and then for boys for 4 grades. We still don't know how students will get bathroom breaks since it will need to be scheduled and escorted. There also need to be hand washing breaks according to the safety procedures and apparently mask breaks. But this will disrupt and change the learning schedule of those who choose to remain virtual, and it in a way will punish them for their decision. My school will also have to return on a hybrid schedule for all grades, as several classes have had more than 50 to 70% of the families say they want to return in person. So teachers are now going to be working with 2 pods each week. And if one pod has a case, then both pods end up staying home. So that will disrupt even more schedules. The only option for some of my coworkers who live with high-risk people is to take unpaid leave. I have coworkers who might not be coming back. So I wonder if the district is going to lift its hiring freeze. Right now, we have an ESOL teacher who works with almost 70 students because the district would not hire another ESOL teacher for our school. So I want to know who is going to take over the instruction and services for some of these students if these teachers don't come back. I also want to point out that 1 testing van for the whole city is not enough. During the SLC period, if the district requested, or the school requested in the morning for a test, the students could come that afternoon, but if they requested in the afternoon, the students would have to come back the next day to get tested for COVID. So you're asking students who have symptoms to come back to the school afterwards the next day.
30 seconds.
About 40 schools open. Imagine that with 160 schools open. I also want to know, like, will in-person be closed for the week after spring break as it was done for winter and Thanksgiving break? And then my final point, which I have been emailing about and bringing up along with many other teachers, is that a large portion of ESOL families will be returning, and yet there are no translations available on the city schools website for many of its linked files. It took over 70 days for the reopening plan to be translated last year. The health and safety operation procedure has been up in English for over 90 days, and yet it is still not available in any other language. So other school districts have large ESOL populations and they're able to release multiple translations of documents at the same time. And I wonder why Baltimore City Schools cannot do the same for its ESOL population. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any call-in, Ms.?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so there are no more call-ins. Is there a motion to vote on resolution 21-0012R?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
point of clarification, just because of the number of folks that we have for the public, if you could explain, you know, that voting on the resolution basically just sends it to the council for second reader.
Okay, yeah, well, we're gonna vote this out of a committee to second reader. I think that we as a council person in this committee, I know the teachers wanted to have a platform so we can actually, not just the council, but the CEO can actually hear what their concerns are here, opening up the school. So the resolution, we voting out so it can go on the second reader on Monday, February the 8th. And actually, we're going to send this over to Annapolis to the state board, because that's really, the school system is really at the jurisdiction of the state we as the city council, the city, we really don't have a whole lot of control over what happens, and we can pick the school board members, we can be part of picking who the CEO. After that, we have no more power, and I think this information, this hearing should be shifted to the state board and let them make some decisions also. So I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and thank you for your leadership this evening and putting this together. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Is there a motion on resolution 21-002R?
So moved, Costello.
Motion by Councilman Costello. Is there a second?
Second, Councilman Glover.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're not on the committee. I'm sorry.
No, yes, I was just gonna say the Board of Clarification.
I had to catch that one. Sorry.
No
Is
worries,
there a
and I'll
motion?
second it, thank you.
Motion by Councilman Glover, second by Councilwoman Porter. Councilman Stokes is a yes. Councilman Bullock, I believe he is away. Okay, he is absent for now. Councilman Cohen?
Yes.
Thank you. Councilman Glover?
Yes.
Thank you. Councilwoman Middleton?
Yes.
Councilwoman Porter?
Yes, but Mr. Chair, may I explain my vote very quickly?
I can't hear you. Say it again. I'm sorry. You're breaking up.
I said, may I have the discretion to explain my vote very quickly?
Sure. You're breaking up though.
Thank you, sir. So I just want to commend you and your leadership with convening tonight. I want to be clear that we're not saying that teachers and educators, professionals should not into the schools. We're saying that we want them to go back into school in safe environments that have the proper public health safeguards in place for individuals and communities. And I look forward to working with all on this call to ensure that happens, and to ensure the protection and safeguard of our students. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Torrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Although I also may make a personal request if we could read the resolution prior to the meeting ending this evening.
Read what resolution? Yes. Let me see. Hold on. Okay, you want me to read it now to you? So yeah.
I was just thinking the public should have it read so it's a part of the official record what we're actually sending to the state. I just wanted to be clear about it.
Sure. Investigative hearing, safe return to in-person schooling for the purpose of inviting the CEO of the Baltimore City Public School System to provide the council with an update regarding safety precautions the school system is taking for the return of students to in-person schooling, and inviting representatives from the Baltimore City Fire Department, Health Department, and Department of Housing Development to comment on the adequacy of those safety precautions. Whereas due to the pandemic, the majority of the Baltimore City school children have been participating in virtual schooling since last spring. Whereas the Baltimore City school system will gradually introduce more students back to traditional in-person classes beginning with the start of the second semester, specifically students in the kindergarten through 5th grade, as well as 9th through 12th grade students. Although families will have the option to remain in virtual learning, and whereas the City Council and the public need to know what safety precautions the Baltimore City Public Schools is taking in reopening schools to some students, such as whether all teachers will be vaccinated before students are allowed back, how classrooms will be organized for social distancing, information regarding ventilation systems in the school, and whether the systems can adequately protect building visitors, etc. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the City Council of Baltimore, that the City Council invites the CEO of Baltimore City School System is taking the return of students in person schooling and inviting representatives from the Baltimore City Fire Department, Health Department, Department of Housing and Community Development to comment on the adequacy of those safety precautions. And be it known, resolved, this copy of this resolution will be sent to the mayor, CEO of Baltimore City School System, Health Commissioner, the fire chief, the acting commissioner of the Department of Housing Development, and the mayor's liaison to the city council. So Councilman Torrance, your vote?
Aye, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. This motion passed. The resolution will be placed on second reader on Monday, February the 2nd, 2021. The full council will review and take a vote at this time. I would like to thank everybody who participated, all my council colleagues, all the callers, all the participants, all our the CEO of the school system, CEO of the health department, the fire department. And I just want to say this testimony given was powerful. I have no doubt that everyone at the table feels strongly about doing what's right by our students and the entire school family. Even though the reopening has been pushed back a few weeks, there is still a lot of things that need to be worked out. This conversation also needs to be taken up at the state level and taken to the school board directly. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.